Hello and welcome back to the Electronic Intifada's live stream for Thursday, May 8th. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleagues Ali Abunimah, Jon Elmer, Asa Winstanley, and Tamara Nassar. It's day 580 of the genocide in Gaza. Coming up, we'll speak with activist Daniel Day, who breached security to climb 25 meters up Big Ben, the iconic clock tower of the Houses of Parliament in London, about his act of protest against Britain's involvement in Israel's genocide in Gaza and its repression of journalists and activists focused on Palestine. We'll also speak with Haifa-based investigative journalist David Sheen, who has authored several critically important exposés of Israel's lies and cover-ups of what happened on October 7th, 2023. We'll also have a discussion with one of our Gaza-based contributors. Later on in the program, Jon will bring us the resistance news from Gaza, where an unexploded Israeli bomb was rewired and detonated against an Israeli tank, and he'll analyze the Yemeni missile attack on Ben Gurion Airport. But first, let's take a look at the news. Here's a brief summary of some of the latest developments this week in Palestine. Israel carried out a series of massacres this week across the Gaza Strip, killing hundreds in massive airstrikes and drone attacks on residential buildings, tent shelters, and crowded markets. These attacks come as the Israeli government said it was conducting a severe escalation in its assaults on Gaza. War crimes suspect and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declared that it was, quote, time to launch the concluding moves, or in other words, a final solution for Palestinians in Gaza. After 2 months of a complete siege, 19 months of an unyielding genocide, and 77 years of the settler colonial ethnic cleansing operations in Palestine. According to the United Nations, as of May 6th, more than 428,000 people have been displaced again since Israel's resumption of full-scale attacks on March 18th, with no safe place to go. On Wednesday, May 7th, Israeli forces bombed a crowded restaurant in Gaza City, one of the last remaining places where people could have a meal, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry in Gaza. More than 30 Palestinians were killed. Al Jazeera reported that 2 missiles were fired at 2 locations, 100 meters apart at the same time. Reporter Hani Mahmoud stated that, quote, the tables and chairs are all thrown around and blood stains the ground as a result of severe bleeding due to the attack. Nearby, he said that bodies were on the ground, soaked in blood and shredded into pieces. Also in Gaza City on Wednesday, 13 people were killed in an Israeli airstrike on the Al-Tufah neighborhood. 3 were killed in Jabalia in the north, 8 people were killed in Khan Yunis in the south, and 3 people, including a child, were killed in Deir Balah in the central Gaza Strip after Israeli forces attacked families sheltering in tents. The death toll from Wednesday alone reached at least 102, with nearly 200 wounded across Gaza, according to the Gaza government media office. Wednesday's massacres came a day after the Israeli army targeted the Abu Hamisa school in the Burej refugee camp in central Gaza, killing at least 30 people in 2 attacks just hours apart. The government media office stated that Israel continues to, quote, deliberately and systematically target shelters and displacement centers. The number of these centers bombed has reached 234 so far, in flagrant violation of all international and humanitarian laws, and in a blatant attempt to inflict the largest possible number of civilian casualties. Quote, these massacres come amid the Israeli occupation's collapse of the health system, the destruction of hospitals, and the denial of their services. Medical staff are under tremendous pressure, face a severe shortage of medical supplies, the closure of crossings to the wounded, and the prevention of fuel imports, exacerbating the humanitarian catastrophe in the Gaza Strip, the media office added. Palestinians in Jabalia in the north used their hands and small tools to try and recover their loved ones in the rubble after an Israeli attack on residential buildings on May 2nd. Reporter Mahmoud Abu Salama said that the attack destroyed the entire neighborhood and that people were hammering away at the rubble, trying to extract the bodies of the dead and injured. Attacks on eastern Gaza City were also reported on May 2nd, killing 9 Palestinians in an attack on a residential building. 11 people were killed, including 3 infants and a child, in an Israeli strike on a building in Khan Yunis on May 3rd. Israeli forces continued to attack the tents of displaced families. On May 4th, journalist Ahmed al-Najjar reported from al-Mawasi, where Israeli forces had bombed Palestinian families sheltering in tents. He said that 10 people, including a child, 7 women, and 2 elderly men, were killed. 10 Palestinians were killed in another attack on tent shelters in the eastern part of the city that same day, along with a strike on a residential building in eastern Gaza City, which killed 15 Palestinians, according to the UN's humanitarian office. Shooting was reported at people attempting to rescue those trapped under the rubble of the struck building. In Rafah, in the southern Gaza Strip, journalist 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐿 spoke to an 88-year-old woman who was reportedly assaulted and punched in the face by Israeli soldiers earlier this week. Hissan Alyan said that she was transferred to an Israeli military site where she was interrogated by an Israeli soldier. She was then transferred to hospital for medical treatment. We'll play the video and then I'll paraphrase what she said.
مش طالع من هنا، لو بتقطعوني نتف مش طالع من هنا.
من وين من هنا؟
من الدار اللي انا فيها.
من فلسطين؟
من فلسطين. انتوا طردتونا من بلادنا واخذتوا ارضنا واخذتوا وطاتنا وطردتونا وراحوا اشتغلوا هان ويشتغلوا هان لما الواحد دبر الدار. وش إلكوا عندنا؟ والله يا ابني يا جبهة البقصة ما حطوا فيه.
ليش بتعيطي يا حجي؟
بعيط من البين الغزال وغصبني. ما دام بنا نثبت الدار لنا 60 سنة. بنا بنحوش لما بنا نثبت الدار. واجوا مسحوها. إلهم نارينهم يضربوا بالصواريخ في الدور في عندنا.
That was Hissan Alyan. She said, quote, "I told the Israeli soldier, I'm not leaving here. Even if you cut me into pieces, I'm not leaving. You forced us out of our country, took our land, you expelled us. What business do you have here with us?" She then says that the soldier lunged at her and hit her. And then she starts crying, saying she was crying from humiliation. She had saved for 60 years to build her house, and then the Israelis wiped it out. Quote, "They've been bombing there with missiles for the past 2 days," she said. As Israel's total closure of all crossings enters the 3rd month, Palestinians in Gaza are being subjected to starvation in catastrophic proportions, according to Euromed Human Rights Monitor. The rights group reported this week that, quote, "A sharp rise in adult death rates was documented among residents of the Gaza Strip, alongside alarming levels of child mortality during the longest continuous total siege imposed by Israel since the beginning of its genocide campaign. Dozens of deaths have been reported from malnutrition or lack of medical care," the group added. Quote, "The latest is a 4-month-old infant, Jinan al-Skafi, who died of severe malnutrition at Al-Rantisi Hospital in western Gaza City, amid what is called the worst campaign of systematic starvation in modern history." Lima Bastami, the director of the legal department at Euromed, stated that, quote, "The crime of starvation in Gaza is fully fledged and committed in broad daylight. It requires no investigation committees or judicial rulings to prove it. It is enough to note that Israel has closed all crossings into the devastated strip for over 2 months, completely banning the entry of food, medicine, and goods. A well-established reality openly acknowledged by Israeli officials without fear of accountability. Gaza is filled with irrefutable evidence of the crime's horror. the emaciated bodies of people and children, tens of thousands lining up daily at charity kitchens, and the escalating death toll from hunger, malnutrition, and associated diseases. Approximately 60,000 children in Gaza are malnourished and in urgent need for treatment, and 16,000 pregnant and breastfeeding women are in desperate need of health care, according to the health ministry in Gaza. Dr. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐿, a physician and a writer in Gaza, has been documenting the plight of the malnourished and starving patients he's treating, many of them infants and young children. He says he is also witnessing a rise in birth defects. He wrote the following on his Twitter page on May 3rd. I'll just read the whole thing. Quote, yesterday at Al-Auda Hospital in northern Gaza, a girl child came into this world, and the world rejected her. She had no brain, not in the poetic sense of innocence or purity, but anatomically, literally, anencephaly. No cerebrum, no future thought, no dreams, no memory to be made, a skull empty of purpose. She was full term. Her mother carried her for 9 long months, through burning nights and weeping mornings, through dust, grief, and sirens, and then birth, but no life to save, only silence. The doctors stood helpless, mocked by the limits of their hands. I saw them, people of medicine, their skilled, sterile fingers trembling, not from confusion, but from recognition. Teratogenic damage, developmental failure, genetic disfigurement, not by chance, but by war. Bombs struck not only buildings, but chromosomes. The weapons, steel, shiny, American, fell not just to destroy the present, but to corrupt the womb, to poison the idea of tomorrow. What do we call this horror? Radiation, dioxins, depleted uranium, invisible toxins that do not kill quickly. They wait. They embed, cross placental walls, and twist the neural tube. They disrupt life before it begins. There are more cases, miscarriages, premature births, malformed limbs, cleft palates wider than sorrow, spinal cords like broken scrolls. The doctors whisper now, this is no cluster, it's a pattern. A Lancet study warns of up to 200,000 indirect victims, not from blast wounds, but from genetic harm passed down to generations unborn. But the world is deaf. It counts the dead by explosions, not deformities. It tracks casualties by limbs lost, not genes shattered. And here beneath the rubble, the deepest wound is in the womb. I saw her yesterday, the mother. She didn't cry. She only looked. Her arms were empty. She had carried a daughter with no brain, but the child had eyelashes, fingers, and that's the most terrible thing, that life tried, that the body obeyed, that even in apocalypse, the cells kept building. Somewhere, another child may be born marked by air their mother once breathed, and they won't know why. They say war ends, that ceasefires come, that healing is possible. But how can it end when it lives in cells, when the placenta becomes a battlefield, when biology becomes the archive of war? This is not just a war of fire and steel. It's a war against life, against women, against the act of birth itself. I have seen death, bodies torn, lungs gasping under broken ribs, but never have I heard a silence as loud as when a mother delivers a child already condemned by the sky above her. And so I write, not to accuse, not to weep, but to remember, because some weapons do not explode, they incubate. That was Dr. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐿 writing from Gaza. Suleiman Hedji, a photojournalist, took the aerial footage you saw over the ruins of Rafah in the south earlier this week. Israeli forces killed 2 journalists this week in Gaza. 214 reporters and media workers have been killed since October 2023, according to the Gaza government media office. On Wednesday, May 7th, Nur el-Din Matar Abdu, who worked as a broadcaster and reporter, was killed in a missile strike east of Gaza City. Just hours later, Israeli forces killed Yahya Sobeh, a reporter for several news outlets and whose footage of two girls eating a meal we showed last week on this live stream. Sobeh was killed in the Gaza City massacre on Wednesday, just 5 hours after the birth of his daughter. Sobeh's last Instagram post was on Tuesday, documenting a mother trying to feed her family.
المعكرونة صارت طحين زي ما انت شايفة. بجوع الأولاد، الطحين غالي كتير، 15 مليون الكيس. طب وإحنا ما فيش معنا ماديا إن نشتري كيس طحين.
It was World Press Freedom Day on May 3rd. Every year around the globe, governments and media leaders congratulate themselves in celebration of press freedom and the heroic work of journalists. The Gaza government media office stated that, quote, however, Gaza and at its heart, its heroic journalists celebrate this day in a different language, the language of blood, hunger, tears, and ashes. While the world celebrates press freedom, the blood of Palestinian journalists is flowing in the streets of Gaza. Their headquarters and cars are being bombed. Their pens and cameras are being smashed. Their homes and property are being targeted, and they are sometimes buried with their families under the rubble simply because they decided to report the truth. Ahmed al-Najjar, who we mentioned earlier in this report, delivered this message to the world from Gaza on Press Freedom Day.
I was asked by the Palestinian Journalists Syndicate to stand before you today because I speak English. But you don't need to be speaking more than one language to be able to describe what is being perpetrated here. In fact, very often you don't need words at all. A rolling camera is all it takes to capture crimes that humanity should have never seen. Crimes that our throats went hoarse, screaming and calling on you to stop. And today, on the World's Day of Press Freedom, we stand here to remind the world that the press in Gaza is bleeding and is taken hostage by the most depraved occupation in modern history. We stand, have questions to journalists around the world who choose to stand silent before the corpses of their Palestinian journalists, asking them, are we less worthy of freedom than you are? Are we less worthy of life than you are? But we also stand to salute and send our deepest respect to every free journalist and every free person who refused to sell their voices despite temptations and intimidation, and continue to share the truth we broadcast here, to stand by our side as if they were among us. And finally, to the free world, we are exhausted and have every right to take off these useless vests. But we won't, because as we stand today, we once again vow for the blood of every child and every journalist the Israeli occupation has killed here and elsewhere, that we will not forget them. We've done our part. We'll keep it on. And it's about time you start doing yours.
That was Ahmed al-Najjar speaking from Gaza on World Press Freedom Day. We've published many features on the Electronic Intifada in the last week, but we wanted to highlight excerpts of a recent law school grad with a generous soul by Hassan Ahmad Abu Sitta, writing from Gaza. Hassan writes that Mahmoud al-Akhras, 27 years old, was his friend for 10 years. Quote, he wanted to become a lawyer just like his aunt. He graduated with a law degree in 2021 and began studying for a master's degree. He then started training at his aunt's law office in Khan Yunis. Mahmoud distinguished himself in that role, as those he worked with at the law office would often commend him for how he treated everyone and for his competence in solving thorny issues. Only 2 weeks before the genocide, on September 24th, 2023, Mahmoud earned his master's degree and became a lawyer. Hassan says that in August 2024, Mahmoud was hit in the head with shrapnel in an Israeli bombing in Khan Yunis. Quote, Mahmoud underwent multiple head surgeries and remained unconscious for 3 weeks. I wasn't able to visit him. The European hospital was located near the border, and it was too dangerous to reach at the time. On September 6th, 2024, Mahmoud's brother called and informed me that Mahmoud had succumbed to his injury. He was buried in a cemetery near his family's house. His brother tells me that their father visits the cemetery every day, sitting beside Mahmoud's grave. I often go to visit Mahmoud, recite the Quran, and speak to him. I want to cry out sometimes, to tell him how much harder life has become. I sit there for hours, sharing with him the heaviness of our days. I once asked Mahmoud as I stood beside his grave, "Do you know that some of our friends have been martyred?" Mahmoud didn't answer. Those are excerpts from A Recent Law School Grad with a Generous Soul by Hassan Ahmed Abu Sitta, writing from Gaza on electronicintifada.net. Finally, as we always do, we wanted to highlight people expressing joy, determination, and resilience across Palestine. The Samir Project, a local mutual aid organization in Gaza, produced this video of the children in their 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐿 camp for displaced families. The children, they say, took a field trip to purchase plants, decorating the camp with mint, basil, jasmine, chamomile, peppers, and flowers. The Samir Project says, quote, they will also be growing a large amount of molokhiyeh in the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐿 camp, which will be ready in 20 days. The amount is enough to feed the camp in small quantities for a week or so. Molokhiyeh is a traditional Palestinian dish that is composed of leaves crushed into soup-like texture made with garlic and is usually served with chicken and rice. The leaves can be preserved for long periods of time without refrigeration. Gaza is extremely fertile and can grow enough crops to sustain most of its population. However, with the genocide, farmland has been destroyed and a lot of the soil has been infected with chemicals. Another challenge is finding space and enough water to grow. This won't stop us, though, and we will continue to persevere in any capacity possible. That's from the Samir Project in Gaza. And that's it for the news roundup. As always, go to electronicintifada.net for much more, especially to read our new features by our brave writers in Gaza. You're watching the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleague Ali Abunimah. Hi, Ali.
Hi, Nora. Thank you so much for that. And I think we should go straight to our next guest so that we can hopefully connect. And we're now very pleased, hopefully, to welcome Donya Abu Sitta with us from Gaza.
Hello.
Hi, Donya. How are you? It's so good to see you.
It's nice to meet you also. But the most accurate answer to answer how are you is that I'm still alive until this moment, because I don't know what will happen in the next moment or where the next targeting will be. But at least I'm alive until this moment. And actually, to be honest, I missed you so much. It has a while since our last meeting. So today I take a risk to go to cafe just to join live stream. And it's dangerous in this day to go out. But I did that because if I must die, let me speak loud to the world until that moment comes. Maybe it makes difference, even if this difference isn't for me, but at least for my people. Like Dr. 𝐓𝐡, rest in peace, said, if I must die, you must live to tell the story. Not just only 𝐓𝐡 who is killed, but thousands upon thousands of Palestinians. Most of them are women and children. So I will continue to tell their stories. Despite all our documentations and our attempts to documentations what happened here in Gaza, this is just only 1% of what happened here in Gaza. There is no words, no headlines, no language can describe what happened here in Gaza. It's beyond an imagination. Everyone is killed and fighted, can barely work because as Israel is occupying and bulking food from getting to people. There are more than 2 million people don't have time. And it is considered as a humanitarian catastrophe here in Gaza, and it's become worse and worse since the war is set by. The famine is covered all areas Gaza Strip because there are no food or ads in Gaza since 2 months ago. A week ago, I see an old man with tired feet in the street. He has fell down, and the people left everything in their hands just to try and run to help him and washing his face. After that, he opened his eyes. The people were worried about him and asked him, "What happened with you? Are you sick?" and so on. He replied to them, "I didn't eat since 2 days, and I'm now out to search for something to feed my children." He just complete his sentence and pass away. We are living in the 21st century, and this is our reality. I feel like it's a harsh joke. And there are many people take risks just to feed their children. To make this picture clear to you, I was living in Gizan in Najjar, and it's now is a dangerous area. In that area was a World Kitchen working, and on April 3, the Israeli army told the World Kitchen to tell the story to evacuate it in that area. Just within a few hours, people before lived 2 famines, so they are decided to sort food in their homes, and they did that. And the people in that area sorted food just to postpone the famine, or at least to save some food for their children. But because the army asked them to evacuate it just during some hours, and they don't have enough time, instead there is a great difficulty in transportation, so they didn't have enough power and time to evacuate it with everything they need. So each family takes just the most important thing, and the stored food is still in their homes. And after that, nowadays they faced famine, so many of them return to their homes, even if that area is so dangerous, just because they want to feed their children. They don't want their children to die because of hunger. And most of them were killed. Yes, it's more than 100 of my neighbors were killed while they returned to their home just to bring some food to their children. To be honest, all people here in Gaza Strip just depend only on one meal. And this meal is difficult to find it. You see people walking in the street exhausted without any power just because of the lack of food. They just search for the simplest thing to feed their children, and the parents start to feed their children just the minimum food, just to keep them stay alive, not to fill that the good food to them. And we as adults don't fear that hunger. How can children do that? Many families start to depend on tequila, yet the World Kitchen annoys that their stored food is run out. A few days, my friend posted on her account on Instagram that suffer from anemia and asking people what I can or what I should eat. And I replied to her like a joke. You must eat anything you want, anything you have, because there is no choice to choose which dish or which meal you want to eat here in Gaza. And people start all the day walking in the street, in the markets, just to find anything to their children. Even if they find simplest thing, there's cost. Big cost, like a bag of flour, it's cost $500 to $600, and just 2 months ago it cost only $5 to $10. And this is because there is not any food in Gaza. And there is, I see the Twitter yesterday, and I see a conversation between the dad and the son, who's a Port Gaza. The son asking his dad why people in Gaza don't eat fish. they have a sea. And I just read it and think of it because it's easy, because the Israeli occupation killed and target fishermen. They are try to get fish from the sea, but even that, even the natural resources is looked and limited by Israeli occupation. So we don't have the right to choose the meal or to have choices to eat. And as you see, and as Nora shared previously, that is yesterday in the Al-Wahda street, they targeting a restaurant, more than 30 people killed. Just there is, as a worker in the restaurant survived, posted in her account that is he heard a conversation between two girls who is friends. One is say it is so expensive. She ordered pizza, and one of them it says it's very expensive, and her friends replied to her, no, let's order it. At least let us eat pizza before we die. Just one pieces of this pizza missing. And the worker comment on this accent, only one piece of pizza is missing, and I hope the girl who was killed ate that, because one is killed and another one is injured. And as you know, meeting friends isn't easy in the wartime. As I wrote in my last features about my friends Fida, I wrote, not all meeting in Gaza end with meeting.
Yeah. It was a
Fida
beautiful...
and I succeed to meet each other.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Fida
Go
and
ahead.
we succeed to meet each other, but me and my friend Roa isn't, because she's killed 2 days ago. She's my friend. I know her from 2019. We are at the same class in the 11th grade. I was sitting in the second desk and she was in the third. We are chatting between classes, before classes and after the classes. Just at that time, I was an access student, which is a scholarship that is helps people to make community service. And she was so excited to hear my stories. Ro'a was, it's so hard to say was instead of is about beloved one, but she was so excited to hear my stories. One day in 2021, she asked me to be a volunteer with me, and we both go to library, to public library, and read stories for the children. Just 3 months ago, she is graduated, and I chatted her saying graduations and so on, and we planned to have celebrations after the war end, and we planned it for everything, but my friends is gone and the war stay. I posted about Ro'a on my Instagram account, and the journalist Yahya Sabah seen my stories, and after 2 hours he is killed also. His daughter come to life at the same day that his father gone forever. It's so difficult. I cannot imagine how this girl will grow up without her father, and at the same thing that when she tried to celebrate her birthday, she will remember a bad news, that is her father killed at the same day. And we not sieged by only Israeli occupation. Actually, we feel that we are served by all the world. They limited our posts, they limited our achievement, they limited our ideas also. as you know, that wrote a book during the genocide, speaking about the events from Nakba until this day. But also when I create an account to Amazon to publish my book, try to sell it, they just allowed me, as because I'm from Gaza, just they allowed me to pay whatever I want, but I cannot sell anything, just because the my locations.
Oh, Donya.
But this is not the first time I faced this thing, because
Dunya, the sound was breaking up a little bit, but we got almost everything you said except at the end. And I want to say, first of all, how sorry we are for your friend Ro'a, Allah yarhamha. It's horrible that we can't stop this. It's been more than a year and a half, and it's continuing. And we're so grateful that you're still here with us, and we pray that you and those around you will continue to be. But Donya, I want to ask you, when we spoke to you last time, and it has been too long, and we missed you too very much. I want you to know that. We also talked about the children that you care for, you and your sisters and some of your colleagues care for. Are you still able to educate children? Can children, I mean, in these circumstances, is there anything you can do to keep children distracted, to keep them learning, to keep them somehow protected from this situation?
yes, we are doing our best to help the children, but as you know, they are targeting every place. So many of the parents are worried about their children and didn't allow them to go every day to the to study and to learn something. And it's hard to just allow kids, because maybe they targeting a near place, and who will be the first with your children.
And Dunya, you said that most people are able to eat, or you said many people are eating. Did you say one meal a day? I also saw reports saying that some people get only one meal every 2 to 3 days. What are you seeing around you? What's happening, if I may ask, in your family, among your neighbors? If you don't mind me asking, I'm sorry to ask.
Actually, it's different from family to family. How's the family have members? It depends. The adults didn't eat her or his meal just to let the children eat, because they are become hunger fast and so on. It's not like it's all family are the same, but it depends on the families. There are eat one meal a day. It maybe one meal during 2 days or 3, and there's just give their meals for children, because there is a mother just give their children one meal, and they and she asked them to sleep again, and when we wake up she asked them to sleep again. And when some of adults ask her why you do that, she answer, because I don't want them to ask me for food, and because I don't want to move more and more, and they will lose their energy.
You also talked about food being very expensive. You said a bag of flour is hundreds of dollars compared with $5 or $10 a few months ago. But if you go to the market, is there food there? Is anything coming in, or do you just find everything empty?
You will see shelver is empty, completely empty, literally empty. There is nothing in the market from a month ago. Just there is a basic thing, and they are trying to pay it. It doesn't solve the problem. But also, vegetables isn't available at all because the occupation has occupied many of agricultural areas, and they didn't allow the farmer to get their crops and so on. So we didn't see vegetables from a month ago,
And in
and
go.
more than many people actually, or many families depend basically on pasta and rice, and it is also expensive.
Yeah. Donya, what can you say about the medical situation, the healthcare situation? What does it look like at the hospitals and clinics right now?
It's hard questions, but it's like you are seeing your people suffering, and you couldn't have the potential or the ability to help them because you don't have painkiller, or you don't have some basic essential to solve just a simple injured. What about the hard and deep injured? There are people suffering. You see people injured in the war, and they are suffering without have any simple rights of giving medicine. They don't take medicine, and in the hospitals when they have simple injured, or even it is deep injured, they ask people to return to home because there is no place to keep the injured.
Donya, how are you keeping yourself going these days?
I'm trying to just writing to just we are act like, because the children and our my young strengths to see that is there is strength them, and I'm trying to do that. And I don't know if you hear me that write a book during the genocide. I tried to publish it, but it doesn't work because I create an account on Amazon. But because I'm from Gaza, they allowed me to buy whatever I want, but don't offer anything to sell. It's not the first time I faced the same this thing, because many things, many chances I lost because just of my location, and it's so bad for the world to make this action.
And we know, in fact, that many online services that people around the world can easily access are completely closed to people in Gaza. Not just Amazon, but PayPal and other services that would allow people to send money and so on. It's very difficult because of that. And Donya, your writing is so incredibly valuable to the world. You really are doing amazing work by continuing to write and continuing to tell the stories, including in your most recent article for the Electronic Intifada, A Day in Ward B, which talks about a maternity ward in Gaza. And we did read from this on the live stream 2 weeks ago. We read this article. So even though you weren't here with us, you were still here because we read your important article to the world, and we're very grateful for the work you're continuing to do at the Electronic Intifada. And I'm going to get in touch with you afterwards to get directly from you a copy of your book, because I want to.
Here is the book.
Good. So thank you for showing that to us, and I'm going to contact you afterwards to see how I can get a copy of it.
Yeah.
See what we can do.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
You're amazing.
Will be my honor to read my book.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Oh, thank you so much, Donya.
Donya, thank you so much for taking the time and making the we know it's difficult to move anywhere in Gaza, and it's risky to come and to speak, to go to a cafe, to get internet access. We're very grateful. We wish you a safe trip back to your family, and we pray for the safety of you and all your family, and that the next time we talk to you soon, this siege will have ended, this war will have ended, and we get to
I
see
hope that.
We're praying for that. Thank you so much, Donya. God bless you and protect you. I want to say on behalf of all of the people who are watching right now, and I can see their messages, I think you can see them too. Many of them are saying thank you, Donya, and saying how much they love you and they love the work that you're doing. And on behalf of all of us, thank you.
Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you, 𝐓𝐡𝐞. Oh, she's extraordinary, and it's such a risk, that people take just going outside.
I mean, just last week we spoke with Ruwaida Amer in Gaza, and her words really stick with me. She said that she just keeps writing and working to keep herself distracted, and Donya is saying a similar thing, and I can imagine that. I don't know, how do you distract yourself from a situation that's so inescapable? It's extraordinary.
Yeah. No, she's so brave, and such dignity and poise, and we're just always so honored to have her and to be able to showcase her writing. And I think a lot of people are asking where they can get the book, so maybe we can ask Donya and
I'll
something out.
I'll follow up with Donya and find out more about that.
That'd be great. Well, moving along, you are watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with Ali Abunimah. On the 8th of March this year, activist Daniel Day breached parliamentary security in London to climb 25 meters up Big Ben, the clock tower of Britain's House of Parliament, one of the most iconic landmarks in the world. It was an act of protest against Britain's involvement in Israel's genocide against Palestinians in Gaza, and against the British state's repression of protest and activism, especially against the direct action group Palestine Action. Equipped with nothing more than a Palestinian flag and a live streaming mobile phone, Dan free climbed barefoot up the Westminster Clock Tower, unfurled his flag, and hung a Palestinian keffiyeh around the tower's stonework. He brought the roads around Parliament to a standstill for hours. Dan said at the time, "This is a protest against state repression and police violence against peaceful protesters. Our rights are being stripped away from us. Our protests are getting banned. We're getting arrested for peacefully protesting. We're getting locked away. So why not bring the protest to the so-called hub of democracy?" He refused to come down for more than 16 hours, with supporters on the ground watching him and cheering him on. He live streamed his ascent from his Instagram account, and we have an article about that action. Eventually, after his act of protest had attracted international headlines, he came down off the clock tower. He was arrested and held on remand until the 15th of April, when he was released on bail. We're delighted to welcome Daniel Day to the live stream. Dan, thanks for being with us today. How are you doing?
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm doing well, thank you.
It's really good to have you. You were arrested straight away after you came down off of Big Ben for 16 hours. What were you charged with, and how much can you tell us about that legal process?
Yeah, so currently I've been charged with public nuisance and trespass on a protected site. So yeah, I was immediately arrested. I was held in police custody while they raided my flat. I was then taken to court and I was remanded to prison for 5 weeks, but I'm now out on bail with a list of restrictions that prevents me from entering London. I have to report to a police station twice a week between certain hours. I have a curfew, and I've got a GPS monitoring tag on my ankle. And all of these restrictions are on me till my court hearing next year.
Next year is your court hearing. Incredible. And what can you tell us about the decision you made to make that climb, to make that stand and be there for 16 hours? What compelled you? Why did you do it?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a whole list of reasons, I guess, that I could go into, but I mean, at the time, there was the flimsy ceasefire agreement underway that Israel obviously kept breaking and was still massacring Palestinians, and it seemed like attention was sort of drifting from the Palestinian cause because of this flimsy ceasefire. And in the UK, we are constantly having more restrictions being put on us, preventing us from peacefully protesting. So really, it was a way to protest and to highlight everything that was going on in Palestine and in the UK, and taking it directly to Parliament, so as to not disrupt any members of the public or anything like that. It was to take direct to Parliament and raise as much awareness as possible, and that's why I live streamed it as well on the day. But we're just seeing week after week more repression from what I call London's worst gang, which is the Metropolitan Police. We're seeing violent attacks from the police for people peacefully protesting on the streets, on the road. Our protests have been banned from certain areas. We were recently banned from protesting at the BBC under a ridiculous reason that there was a synagogue nearby. But just weeks later, the police decided to raid a Quakers building because there was protesters having a discussion in there. So none of their reasoning really makes any sense. It's just that they make up the rules as they go along, and yeah, any solidarity with Palestine is harshly repressed.
Yeah.
Why do you think they have to repress it so much? I mean, from your perspective, how widespread is support for Palestine and awareness of what's going on in Gaza? And what's the reaction been to your protest? I mean, do people recognize you in the street? Or, I mean, what? It was a pretty big story. So,
yeah. So, to be honest, the Palestine movement in the UK, I've never seen such a beautiful movement. You're amongst people when you're out on marches or demos. You're amongst people from every single kind of background that you can imagine. It's absolutely beautiful. So, and we've seen some of the largest marches that London's ever seen. So there is serious support for Palestine in the UK, and quite honestly, I think the government finds this a major threat because they understand that that we are powerful in our numbers, and that we know that Britain has been tied to the atrocities in Palestine from the beginning with the Balfour Declaration. So yeah, it's so important seeing how such a diverse movement it is. And yeah, so since my release, it's been a bit, it's been quite overwhelming, to be honest. And yeah, I have been sort of recognised in my local area as well. I've been given a number of nicknames, from Big Ben to Spider-Man, and yeah, it's
had you? I mean, you are an I'm hoping you're. Well, I don't know. Were you an experienced climber, or was that your first?
So it's funny because when I was in prison, a lot of people were saying like, oh, like you must be like a professional climber and all this, but I've been climbing since I was a child. I've climbed everything. It's just something I've always done, but I don't call myself a climber because I'm not part of any like climbing groups or anything like that. But
now you are. You made your own group. Yeah.
That's it. But yeah, so it's just something that I've always done and just comes naturally, I guess. So and this is the thing, this is what I want to stress as well. It's in this movement, we are all so individual, and we all have our own strengths. So I harnessed what I can do, and made that something that could be impactful to try and make a difference. And every single one of us has our own quirks and things that we are capable of. So that's what makes a movement so powerful, is we bring all of our different attributes together to make a really powerful movement.
Dan, what does your, you said that there's a hearing next year. What does your legal case look like right now? Do you have good legal representation? And talk us through the process.
Yeah, so so I'm back in court. So it'd be Crown Court next year. Yeah, I've got great legal representation. They thankfully got me out on bail after being in prison for 5 weeks. So I'm looking at public nuisance charge and trespass on a protected site. The public nuisance charge it's a strange one. It's one that they seem to be throwing around a lot for protesters. Various groups have been targeted with this charge, including the group Just Stop Oil, who have received a number of years sentences for that particular charge. So yeah, it's one that they like to use to crack down on protests in the UK. Yeah.
And tell us a little bit about your time inside prison for 5 weeks. What was that like? What kind of, were people aware of the action that you took? It
was very, very strange going in. So, so initially when I got taken to a high security wing because I was classed as high profile and high risk. They also put me on escape risk, which meant they took all of my clothes away when I was in my cell. I was only allowed to be in my underwear. I wasn't allowed phone calls to anyone for 7 days. But one thing that was really interesting was going in, and because in that prison, you're locked up for 23 hours a day. So, and there are TVs in the cell. So a lot of people had already seen the action. So when I went in there, they knew who I was. So yeah, it was an immediate conversation starter with all the prisoners in there. And there was so much support from all the prisoners in there. I felt I felt quite welcomed as soon as I was in there. But it was also great because it was like I say, a conversation start. So I spent many hours in the courtyard on multiple different days, just educating people about Palestine and everything that was going on. And so yeah, that was really important. And it was interesting because even some of the prison guards would come to my cell and I'd say, "Oh, well done," and sort of like give me a fist bump for my action as well. So it just felt really strange being locked up, but at the same time congratulated on my action.
Amazing.
Well, it's I mean, it's you know, reprehensible that you are subjected to that treatment at all, and that you have to even protest against a genocide that this government, your government, could act to stop instead of support as it is. But I have to say, it's probably fair of them to think that you might be able to climb your way out of there. But having said that, it is amazing that there is solidarity everywhere, and that's, I think, you know, another demonstration of that. Dan, just before we let you go, how can people find out more or find out ways that they might want to support you? Do you have a website or anything like that?
So currently I'm only active on Instagram. Yeah, I'm not trying to get involved in too much at the moment. It's all a bit overwhelming at the moment. So I'm currently on an Instagram on the same account that I went live on the day, which is Free All of Us. And there's also a fundraiser on there for Salala Animal Rescue in Gaza, who are actually looking after all the non-humans who were displaced as well. So cats and dogs are all being looked after by individuals in Gaza as well. So there's a fundraiser on there. And yeah, so that's where I'm most active at the moment.
And is there anything regarding legal support or anything like that, or are you well covered with that?
So yeah, I've currently there is another link on there as well that does have a link to a fundraiser for my own legal costs and so on as well. Yeah.
Amazing. So people can get all of those links at your Instagram, which is at Free All of Us. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay.
At Free All of Us. Okay.
Incredible. Well, Dan, we definitely want to have an update, you know, and have you back on to talk more about activism and repression that activists are facing and how you're challenging it and continuing to organize despite and in spite of the repression. And thank you for what you did and for being with us on the Electronic Intifada live stream today.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's been amazing. I've paid close attention to this live stream for a long time, so it's amazing to be on here. Thank you very much.
Oh,
thank you, Dan, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thanks a lot. Take care.
Thank you. Excellent.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, yeah,
courage and like skill. Yeah,
it shows that whatever skill you have, you can put it to use in a good cause. So that's very inspiring. I won't be climbing any towers. I'm a little bit afraid of heights, but that was pretty amazing.
Yeah, incredible.
Well, we still have a lot more to get through today. Still a lot of really important information to come up. So we're gonna go forward now with our next discussion. I'll just remind people that you're watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Ali Abu Ni'ma here with my colleague Nora Barrows-Friedman. David Sheen is an investigative journalist from Canada who is based in Haifa. He has written for many outlets and has contributed many important stories to the Electronic Intifada since 2012. Since the start of the Israeli genocide in Gaza in particular, Sheen has authored, sometimes jointly with me, I'm proud to say, critically important exposés of Israel's lies and cover-ups of what happened on October 7th. On October 15, 2023, we published what, in my opinion, is one of the most significant pieces that I've worked on in the past 2 years. The headline is, Israeli forces shot their own civilians, kibbutz survivor says. That survivor, Yasmin Porat, gave the first detailed account of how Israeli forces fired on the home of Pessi Cohen in kibbutz Be'eri, massacring a number of Israeli civilians and Palestinian fighters inside. And it was perhaps the first major revelation of how Israel killed many of its own people that day. In July last year, David Sheen and I wrote about how the Israeli army has tried to cover up the deliberate tank shelling of Pessi Cohen's house, even though it was clear that there were Israeli civilians inside who would be, and in fact were, incinerated. That cover-up was apparently intended to protect Barak Hiram, the brigadier general who ordered the attack. There were many other such incidents of Israel using massive and indiscriminate fire against its own people on October 7th, or explicitly invoking the so-called Hannibal Directive, an Israeli military doctrine that allows the use of lethal force to stop Israelis being taken captive, even if it means knowingly killing them. While it was known that Israel had used the Hannibal Directive previously against its own soldiers, October 7th is the first time it was used, and on a wide scale, against Israeli civilians as well as soldiers. Our colleague 𝐓𝐡𝐞 Stanley has, of course, reported on that for the Electronic Intifada, as well as on this live stream. As for David Sheen, his most recent piece was published by the Electronic Intifada on April 30th. It's headlined, "The Vach Brothers, Israel's First Family of Genocide." We're going to talk about that and other developments right now with David Sheen. David, welcome to the Electronic Intifada live stream.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Good to see you,
it's
David.
Great. Yeah, we've spoken about you many times on the live stream, but we're and of course you've been on the Electronic Intifada podcast, but we're really excited to have you on the live stream now, David. Before we get into the discussion, let's watch this short video clip together.
Sure.
Is the destruction then? I'm sorry. Why is the destruction?
This destruction
it looks like more
was
like a
cause of our tanks attack.
fight on them.
Yeah, because they were blocked in these houses, and we needed to conquer back the whole settlement, and it couldn't be happened without the tanks.
So how many were here, and then how many survived? How many did you?
No one survived from this house. From other buildings, we rescued many. Where you stand exactly, were lying 2 couples, 2 men, 2 women, handcuffed. And inside this house were another 15 burned people, among them 8 babies. They were concentrated them, and they killed them, and they burned them.
Did you see?
I evacuated them.
So, David, that was a clip from a video report you made for the Electronic Intifada last year, and it's also, people can watch it in your latest article. And it shows Colonel Golan Vach speaking to journalists in the days after October 7, 2023. Give us the basics here. Who is Golan Vach, and what is he talking about there? What's the significance of the story he just told about 8 burned babies and other atrocities he claims to have witnessed?
Mm-hmm. Well, briefly about Colonel Golan Vach. He grew up in Kiryat Arba, the most notorious as being one of the most racist settlements in the occupied West Bank, outside of Hebron. He grew up there, and his father was actually the mayor of the town. Growing up, he goes to the military academy called Bnei David, and at this academy, it is probably the most racist academy in the country, preparing Israeli soldiers and teaching them, if you can believe this, even preaching for the reestablishment of literal slavery, to actually enslave Palestinians literally. So this is his upbringing that he comes up with, and then in the army he manages to become what you could say in in the words of the Israeli press, the most famous face of the Israeli army, because he headed for many years, including on October 7th, what's called Insarag heavy unit. So all over the world, every country has a kind of team that is like a crack team to come and help people who find themselves the victims of natural disasters. All over the world, these are secular teams, but in Israel, of course, for various reasons, this is a military team. Among other reasons, to give them the skills, and also for propaganda reasons, to make them kind of safety wash the atrocities of the army. So in any case, he's coming into October 7th as being in charge of this rescue unit. So on the day of October 7th, he gets to the killing fields of Kibbutz Be'eri and the Supernova Party. And his job, he will say, is to collect bodies. But what essentially was his job was twofold. One, he needed to help cover up the fact and whitewash the fact that Israeli forces had killed, large amounts of their own civilians as part of the Hannibal Directive to kill any possible Israeli who might be a hostage, so that you won't have to pay a political price later for their exchange. And so that day, as we have chronicled at the Electronic Intifada, that occurred many times, and Golan Bach's job was in part to cover that up. So, for example, he comes to Kibbutz Be'eri, and he comes to the house of Pessi Cohen, where it was the most amount of mass, or what they call mass Hannibal, the most amount of Hannibaled Israeli civilians to die in a single domicile. And in fact, 13 people died there. Between 9 and 10 of them died because the general in charge of the Israeli forces there said, fire this tank at the house, even at the cost of civilian casualties. We just need to keep going and move forward. And it's not, it's more important for us to conquer. And with that tank fire, they killed between 9 and 10 civilians, 7 of them by burning them to death. So at the end of this battle, we have Israeli bodies that have been, also the bodies of Palestinian fighters, but dozens of bodies, including the bodies of Israeli civilians, that are completely immolated, and he now has to explain it. And so when the cameras of news outlets around the world converge on Kibbutz Be'eri exactly 1 week after the October 7th attacks, on October 14th, Golan Bach is taking VIP tours of dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of international reporters around the site and explaining what happened there, and inventing atrocities that never occurred, and inventing people that never occurred, infants that never lived. He just invented, straight out of his own sick mind, this idea that Palestinian fighters, who we know for a fact treated in that specific case, we know because there were Israelis who survived the ordeal, as you mentioned, Yasmin Porat, and told how she was treated humanely by her captors, and as were the people she was held captive with, that in fact, the Israeli government, the Israeli army fired on these people, burnt them, and it wasn't, as I said, it was just, he invented this story of, now there were 8 babies there, and Palestinian fighters burnt 8 babies, and I took them out with my own hands. This was the first time, because you have to recall, in the first few days afterwards, there were a few reports of people saying, yes, Israeli baby was butchered, Israeli baby was beheaded, Israeli baby was burned. But when press kind of pushed back, people retreated from that claim because it couldn't be substantiated, because it never occurred. But then they found someone to say it, and they put the face behind those evil words, those blood libels. And that face was the most famous face of the Israeli army. So therefore, the most likely to be believed. And so when he said it to all these countries, to all these international journalists, rather, they believed it and they broadcast it. And this is how it held currency, and still holds currency, because till this day, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, whether he travels to the US Congress, Washington, D.C., or whether he speaks at the United Nations in New York City, he is repeating these blood libels over and over again, these stories that never existed, purely on the basis of the claims of this liar, Colonel Golan Bach, who invented these 6 stories for 2 reasons. One, to cover up the harm that Israel had done to its own citizens, and also, of course, to incite the genocide that followed. And he did this, as we showed in our the investigation that was published a year ago in June. We showed how he did this in Be'eri. But then in this new reporting that just came out last week, we're also showing how he did the same thing at the Supernova Festival, how he invented other atrocity hoaxes. Amongst the atrocity hoaxes he invented, he claims that Palestinian fighters created a bonfire of 120 Israeli civilians and burned them all in one big pyre. Just absolute atrocity hoax. Never occurred, nothing even remotely close to that. Not even in any way, shape, or form. Okay, it's the same thing. He said that around 100 Israeli women were raped. He describes 100 Israeli women tied to trees in the Supernova party area. Again, absolute lies, no basis in reality whatsoever. The most atrocious lies imaginable in order to incite genocide. Now, what we also show in the new investigation is, I mean, I've basically just given you the importance of what Golan Vach did, But as we show in the new article published last week, he got to not only incite that genocide, but then participate in it and lead it, if you can imagine that. The people that perpetuated these lies that ended up, being used to manufacture consent for the annihilation of the Gaza Strip and Palestinian life there, then enabled those very same Israeli officers to be at the forefront, at the vanguard of the destruction of Palestinian life in the Gaza Strip. So the way that it can most easily be understood is the so-called Netzarim axis, okay, which is basically a highway that Israel built of destruction to bisect the entire Gaza Strip. And this was created of a certain width, but then once the Israeli brother, the elder brother of the younger brother of Golan Vach, but of a higher rank in the army.
Thank you, David. Just to as you say, well, maybe spell out for us. You say that obviously Golan Vach played a key role. He was the face of Israel's atrocity propaganda and lies, telling these fabricated stories about burned babies and bonfires of Israelis, which is all spelled out in your newest article. And then you say he went into Gaza and he was particularly focused on the so-called Netzarim axis or Netzarim corridor, as we've often called it in this live stream. And you mentioned his brothers. Your article is called the Vach brothers, the first family of genocide. So why don't you tell us, so there's Golan Vach, tell us who his brothers are and what they all did in Gaza once the genocide began. Okay.
So it's also worth mentioning that Barak Hiram, the general who led Israeli forces, who gave the order to shoot that tank at the house of Pesikon in Be'eri that resulted in the torching, the immolation of all these Israeli civilians, that was also one of the people who then led the genocide. So his name, again, Barak Hiram, head of the 99th Division. So basically the Netzarim Junction, the forces that occupied it and who mercilessly killed Palestinian civilians who lived in it and passed through it for the last year and a half. So it was basically a number of Israeli fighting units that went one after the other and completed that mission of obliterating Palestinian life there. That task was shared by both Barak Hiram, the general from Be'eri, and Yehuda Vach, who was the brother of Golan Vach, the rescue chief and inciter of blood libels. But his younger brother Yehuda Vach, also a brigadier general, he heads the 252nd Division. So the 99th of Barak Hiram and the 252nd of Yehuda Vach, they have traded places and occupied that Netzarim corridor. And we have quotes that were brought from the article by Haaretz, by Yaniv Kubovich, who interviewed Israeli soldiers who came back to the front and described what they saw there from their experience, that there was a competition between units who could kill the most civilians, and other horrible atrocities that went on that are quoted in the article. But what Yehuda did as the overall commander in charge, he brought in his brothers. And what his brother Golan Vach of Blood Bible fame, what he did was he became essentially what they call the demolitions contractor of the Gaza Strip. Okay, so he utilized the skill sets that he specialized in for serving in this United Nations recognized rescue unit, and those same technologies and contacts and skill sets he used in order to increase the amount of destruction in Gaza. And Art's reporting describes, based on these soldiers who were there, saying that they built up buildings that served no military purpose, that could not have threatened them in any way, shape, or form. It was all about destruction, because these men, again, studied Ad B'nai Eli, want the genocide to occur, want non-Jews to be genocided from the country. And so they did everything they could to do that, including even going beyond the regular rules of the army, as if the army's war plans weren't brutal enough. So it's alleged in the article that the Vach brothers, Yehuda Vach bringing in his brothers, that they essentially ramped up the genocide. And lots of quotes from the article explaining how that happened. The younger of the three, Captain Elisha Vach, he also served and took part in the annihilation of Gaza, but what's his role is more on the outside, because he has been part of a NGO movement that he started to force the Israeli government to become even more brutal. From his perspective and the perspective of his political camp, they believe that it's not genocidal enough, that, in their words, let us win. He co-authored a letter complaining to the Israeli military chief of staff, saying, we, the undersigned, soldiers in this and this and this unit, are upset because we are being hamstrung, and you're not allowing us to kill as wantonly as we want to. So please, allow us to do so by changing the rules and making even more barbaric. Essentially, I'm paraphrasing, of course. So on the outside, he has been leading this pressure, this pressure group, and they camped out outside the home of Israel's defense minister. And on TV, you saw them, the host of Israeli national television, like cheering him on. Yeah, good for you that you're doing this. And, he's treated like a national hero for demanding that the genocide be even more vicious than it already is. So that basically gives you the tripartite Vach brothers and just a little bit of what each of them have done to make the genocide even worse. Now, of course, some people would say, as in the Haaretz article, they would claim these guys are operating like a rogue unit in the Israeli army. It's not the Israeli army, decision makers who are responsible for this. It's just Vach and his cohorts. And please,
not an
since
aberration.
This time, they're constantly meeting with the defense minister, the army chief of staff, continuing to get their approval. The younger brother Elisha Vach is praised by Israel's chief rabbi. And of course, Golan Vach himself, the original blood libeler who got the whole ball rolling. I mean, he flies all around the world. The Jewish agency, the proto-state organization that is responsible for so much of the colonization of the country and dispossession of Palestinians. So the Jewish agency is, funding, his appearances all over the world, so that he can repeat the lies that he spoke after October 7th. And of course, to use those stories, those atrocities that he invented to convince local Jews to abandon the countries that they live in and to immigrate to Israel, to be part of Israel's demographic war, and to inherit the territories that, that he's now helping to conquer.
Completely
so that's the 𝐓𝐻 family, if you can imagine. That's why we call them the first family of genocide.
David, let's talk a little bit about how internally within, the Israeli press, what the pushback looks like against, these kinds of just disgusting lies that the 𝐓𝐻 family are perpetrating. Let's look at another video of the Israeli journalist Israel Frey.
יום הזיכרון 2025, אני מבקש להקדיש לזכר 8 תינוקות שנשרפו באכזריות ב7 לאוקטובר בקיבוץ בארי. רגע, רציתי להביא את התמונות של התינוקות. איך קוראים להם? האם זה בכלל קרה? בואו נקשיב למה שסיפרו קציני צה"ל בכירים על מה שהתרחש בבית של פסיקו.
So that's the Israeli journalist Israel Frey. He posted that video last week for Israel's so-called Memorial Day. And he starts off saying, quote, "I would like to dedicate to the 8 babies that were brutally burned on October 7th in kibbutz Be'eri." But if you watch the rest of the video, you can quickly understand that he's being sarcastic. He says he looked for the photos and the names of the babies, but he couldn't find them because they don't exist, like you said, David. And that incident never happened. So basically, he covers the same ground that we have in our reporting. Talk about the significance of an Israeli journalist talking about this in Hebrew. Is this common, and is it dangerous?
Yeah, very much so. So first of all, just to kind of frame what we're looking at, a poll came out just a little while ago in recent weeks, and we found that the percentage of Israeli Jews who have a moral problem with what the Israeli army is doing in the Gaza Strip is 3%. So that means amongst Israeli Jews, for every one that thinks that what's going on is immoral, there's 32 Israeli Jews who do not think that there's any moral problem with what's going on in the Gaza Strip. So that means that, sadly, sickeningly, you're constantly surrounded in society by, people who support genocide. It also means that 1 out of every 33 of them doesn't. And amongst them, there's a small percentage who have the courage or find the courage to resist and speak out. And in the case of this specific journalist, Israel Frey, he has the courage to do so in Hebrew. And because he does so, of course, he is very much comes under threat. For example, the very week right after October 7th, that Sabbath, he, put out a call calling for the end of any Israeli attacks on the Gaza Strip. And he was immediately set upon, by massive mobs who shot fireworks at his apartment, in all hours of the night, masses of people haranguing him, and the cops wouldn't help him, and he had to flee to a hidden location from which he lives to this day. So he continues to report. That wasn't his only time doing so. He continues to report on Palestinian issues in 48 Israel and other issues of injustice. And but as I said, he's one of those few voices, the few rare ones that do. And because he obviously, it comes under threat, but also, you have to realize that anyone who does so, it's not only just the mob mentality. Israel passed a law in January making it illegal, punishable by 5 years in jail if you dare to say something that's against the state narrative about what allegedly occurred and didn't occur on October 7th, 2023. So, Israel has already been brought in by the police accused of incitement to terrorism, and he's been interrogated. So it's not clear. Already there's, a cloud of suspicion on him from the streets, from the police, and, with obviously the state forces cracking down inside 48 on any kind of free discourse and discussion about what's going on, it's going to be pressure on people to to completely, to be completely silent about it. So he's taking some risk. In terms of how that's, his word is being received in Israeli society, let's just say that in recent weeks, of course, we've seen protests in the streets, Israelis coming out and demanding the end to the war, but the people who come to those protests are interested in the main in the end of the war so that there can be Israeli hostages repatriated back to Israel. They're not interested in the end of the war because it's the cause of the death of, thousands of tens of thousands of Palestinian children. In fact, at these protests, when there is a small minority of people who aren't just, holding up the yellow ribbons for the hostages, but have other signs that say, stop the genocide or whatever relating to the deaths of Palestinian children, then you have the parents of those hostages coming on the microphone and saying, we don't want you. We don't want you here. This is only for the hostages. We don't want any signs about Palestinian children. This isn't about the Palestinian children. In one case, a mother of one of the hostages comes and actually rips the signs out of their hands. So, the few Israelis who from minute one were calling for a hostage deal, which would have been in the best interests, of course, of Israeli civilians, they are, and only later, hostage families started to organize, and only later did they start to have the chutzpah to say, okay, well, maybe we should oppose the government policy and demands that the government prioritize the return of our children. So these Johnny-come-latelys, who are the families of the actual victims, are, they're mad because if their protest smells a little bit leftist, then it'll drive even more racist Israelis away from the camp that's calling for the end of, a ceasefire of some sorts. So they're worried about losing the vast majority of Israelis who don't, from their perspective, the war should be eternal. And so therefore, they're, the few people who were the first ones to call for an end to war are being, signs ripped from their hand and, of course, arrested at protests. Here in Haifa, we saw police arresting protesters who are protesting against the war. The few who show up, with the minute they pull out a sign that's anti-genocide, the minute they start chanting something, boom, police comes in, takes them to a car, and that's the end of the story. So very, very, very little pushback against the genocide in Jewish Israeli society.
And you're in Haifa, which is known as a mixed city, which is a polite way of saying that not all the Palestinians were ethnically cleansed when the Zionist settler colony was established. What about Palestinians there? I mean, we've seen many stories of Palestinians being arrested simply for Facebook posts. What can you say about the situation in the city where you live? You mentioned the arrests of protests, but is there a general fear about speaking out, even on social media? How does it work there?
Sure. Well, because Haifa is far from the 67 area, so you don't have some of the same concerns that, say, the Jerusalemites might have, because they're more liable to pass some kind of checkpoint where they would have to potentially submit their mobile phones and then be subject to a search of their social media. So here in Haifa, you wouldn't really worry about someone encountering you in the streets. Just to put it in perspective, when we talk about mixed cities, historically, for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years, Haifa's been a mixed city. It was a multicultural Muslim city coming into the 20th century. In 1947, it was 50-50 at that point. Jews had colonized it to the point where it was 50% Jewish, 50% Palestinian, and after the Nakba, it became 90+% Jewish. So since that time, it's been just about the same. So when we talk about mixed city, I just don't want people to think 50-50. We're talking about today about 12% Palestinian, something like that. In any case,
which is remarkable because in Israeli propaganda, Haifa is always presented as this model of coexistence, which of course Israel doesn't want, because if they wanted coexistence, then you wouldn't have to have like a Jewish supremacist state. You could just have coexistence. But
I mean, Haifa is, I'm not going to lie. I mean, the reason why I live here is because in 48 territories, it's from my perspective, the best possible world, you know, not only the natural beauty, you know, seeing as we are right here on the Mediterranean, from my apartment, I can see all the way to 𝐓𝐿𝐴 on a clear day. So besides the natural beauty of the city, the fact that there is, I will just say that it's maybe of the very few mixed cities, so-called mixed cities, where you have both, where it's not just 90% Jewish or 90% or more Palestinian. It's the one of the maybe handful of places where it's mixed. So here you actually have in the city center a Palestinian middle class that's strong economically, and I think that more than anything is what sets the vibe up. So it can create a space, because it's, you know, the Palestinians are firmly rooted now financially in the city, to create a culture in which people can tap into it. But of course, anyone who I talk to is just, you know, has their heads down. Of course, there's a little bit of political activity there. As I mentioned, there are protests every couple weeks against the war, but they're treated with zero tolerance, and it's only a few dozen people who show up, unfortunately. People are, you know, naturally, they're thinking of their own finances. I know, of course, people who are also leaving. I saw this more amongst Jewish citizens on the left side of the political spectrum, but I'm starting to see it also now in the Palestinian community, of people themselves leaving, or their children are leaving. It's certainly a phenomenon. People are, this isn't a way to live, and it's gotten only worse since October 7th, even in the 48 territories.
And that's an issue we've discussed with Shir Hever and others, sort of the longer term brain drain, and of course now the aerial blockade that makes traveling in and out of Lid airport more and more difficult. That being the original name for what Israel now calls Ben Gurion Airport. But David, just before we let you go, just to bring it back to some of the incredible journalism that you are doing, and that we're very happy to publish at the Electronic Intifada. You know, one could despair almost that these lies continue to propagate, the lies about burned babies and all the other atrocity propaganda. And as you said, the discussion is there in Israel. It's probably there more than it is in the United States. I mean, many of our sources in our reporting, if not all of them, are Israeli sources. So this is present in Israel, even if it's somewhat on the margins. But what do you think, what do you hope the impact of your work will be now and in the future? What's the point of spending so much time and effort debunking October 7 lies?
Well, you know, it's I guess what you're asking a kind of a personal question. What, you know, in a sense, you know, how are you personally motivated to do this work? I mean, I noticed it. You know, it was my job. I was working on the Al Jazeera film about what did and didn't happen October 7th. It came out in March, very soon after the Israeli government made Al Jazeera's work illegal in the country. But while working on this project, I came to realize of these lies. And once you have this information, it's like, okay, I just need to preserve my brain long enough until this can get down on paper or onto bits and bytes and zeros and ones, until it can be out there. It's important that people know this, and sadly, it's, you know, it's super frustrating because, you know, the stuff around Al Jazeera came out in March of last year. The article we first published about Golan Vach in Electronic Intifada, that came out in June. So optimally, if people would have been horrified, you know, at that point, then Yehuda Vach would have never been able to replace Barak Hiram in the Netzarim Junction, and all the destruction that he and his brothers were then responsible for exacerbating wouldn't have occurred. I mean, of course, it doesn't, do anything about all of the destruction that did occur, but I realize that, like, seriously, if one of these articles would have gone viral outside of, small pro-Palestinian circles, then it could have changed how things went down. And so, of course, it's frustrating, but I cannot allow the measure of whether I do this work be based on if I managed to get 1 million views or if it managed to crack the mainstream media, because then the work wouldn't happen. It has to happen. So you can't depend upon that to be motivated. I don't lack for motivation. What's right is right and wrong is wrong. If I need extra motivation, which I don't, I think about my own grandparents who went through the Holocaust and lost dozens of members of their families. And I am horrified at the thought that people will legitimately start. I mean, of course, it's illegitimate to say, but it's logical to understand why they would start to say, well, if these Jews made up all these horrific atrocities, well, it was just that Jew and that Jew. Well, it's the head of the army unit that did it. And then it was the prime minister of the country and the president of the country and the Democratic majority, in the United States who repeated these ad nauseum. And then people are going to say, well, if the mainstream Israel and Israel in power supported these atrocious lies, then what's not to say that the horrors of the Holocaust weren't invented and there was no genocide of the Jews by Nazi Germany? So if anything, if I which I don't, but if anything, that that motivate me to be like, all the more reason why this needs to come out. So no one can afterward say, oh, people tried to sweep it. Well, yeah, sickeningly, people did try to sweep this under the rug, and sickeningly, the rest of the Israeli media has completely ignored this, and they've been afraid, even on the left side of the spectrum of the media, they've been afraid to challenge the Israeli government's narrative about October 7th for fear, again, of losing the mainstream, which they'll never receive anyways, because the mainstream is already so skewed to the far right. But in doing so, they've completely, put me at risk and put the name of Jewish people at risk for eternity by making the official state of the Jews out to be the biggest blood libelers of the 21st century. So I don't need to, I wake up in the morning and I've got work to do, and we do it because we have to do it. And if I happen to be here at this particular corner where I'm able to make a difference, great. Everyone does their part,
Well, you certainly have made a difference, and you are making a difference, David. I'm very proud of the investigations we've done about what happened on October 7th and revealing many of the lies. And our work has stood the test of time, because the more that comes out, the more it's clear that we were right about some of the things we said very early on, and before many other people dared to say them. And we're very grateful to you, because your work has been critically important in that. And I want to remind people that your most recent article for the Electronic Intifada was published just at the end of April, and it's called The 𝐓𝐡𝐞 Brothers, Israel's First Family of Genocide. And I highly recommend reading that and all your other work. You also have a website. What's your website, David?
It's just davidsheen.com, just my name, and it should be right there on screen. And
you're also active on social media, and I know that all your social media accounts are linked from your website too, as well as in your articles at the Electronic Intifada. So thank you for joining us, David. It took a long time to get you on the live stream, but it won't hopefully take us as long a time to get you back. And we're very, very grateful to you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, David.
Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Incredible work. He's I've been friends with him for 20 years, I think, at this point, and he's just his work is impeccable.
Yeah, and David's work going back, I mentioned that he has been writing for the Electronic Intifada, making videos since 2012, which is a very long time. And that work, if you go back and look at it, it's pioneering, revealing the true face of Israeli and Zionist racism, not just towards Palestinians, but also towards particularly African refugees and asylum seekers in Israel. Stuff that was never present in mainstream media for obvious reasons, because telling the truth about Israel is something that they don't want to do.
No, never. No. But we keep doing it because this is our duty, and people like David, who are in the belly of the beast there, he's one of the few, courageous journalists who is not afraid to uncover the truths that would rather the Israeli government and its acolytes would rather be kept covered. So thank you so much, David. Let's bring Jon on. We still have a lot more show to get to. Hey, Jon.
Hello. Good show.
Yes. So much. And so much has happened in Gaza. The resistance is resisting. And there's so much to say about what happened with Yemen this week. Let's get right into it, and then in the discussion, we'll also talk a little bit more about have some political analysis of what happened with Yemen. But take us to the resistance in Gaza, Jon.
All right, let's do it. All right, so you are watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada. I am Jon Elmer. This is the Resistance Report for day 580. As Nora said, I will be covering Yemen in another segment later on in the show. But as always, let's begin with Gaza. We're going to pull up this first map that is updated this week. This is the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs map. And you can see the purple on this map is the buffer zone, and the orange is evacuation no-go areas. You combine those two and you get, at least at this point, 70% of the territory of Gaza is a no-go zone or a buffer zone. That has been consistently climbing each week by a small number, but by and large, the Israelis have operated in what are the buffer zones, and everything moving forward now is going to be in built up areas, and there's going to be significant resistance in those areas. We are reporting today on day 68 of the total siege and blockade of the Gaza Strip. Israel has been bragging on their military field report channels about 50 airstrikes a day. Nora talked about the carnage that has created. Those are civilian targets. The resistance encounters with the Israelis are a mere fraction of the toll from what we can see right now. The beginnings of the press on the south have happened, and this week is the first week that we're seeing consistent resistance operations on a day-to-day basis throughout the south based on the Moreg corridor. Also this week, just to say, the Israeli military chief of staff has issued a call up for tens of thousands of reserves. The Israelis are talking about a major operation in Gaza, as if that hasn't been going on for 580 days. They're calling it Operation Gideon's Chariot, and the prime minister has made it clear that this plan differs from its predecessors in that we are moving the method of raids to occupying the territories and remaining in them. And there was an interesting report on NPR this week where they had a Haaretz correspondent on who talked about how the English language statements by the Israeli military are completely different than the Hebrew statements. So I'm going to skip the English statements and we'll just hear what they're telling their own people in what they believe is their secret language of Hebrew. The main part of this plan is to push the population south into Rafah, again, which is exactly the same as the initial operation that is now in day 580. But the goal is to permanently occupy, according to the Israelis, the land and to evoke the transfer of Palestinians. Once they reach Rafah, they will be given the quote-unquote voluntary transfer, which is, of course, not a concept. It's ethnic cleansing of the highest order and a war crime of the highest order. After 580 days of these crimes, it's hard to imagine we could get worse, but this plan is worse. But the Israeli military, there was a leaked document shown to Haaretz this week, Israeli military planning document that listed the objectives of the pending operation. The first one is defeating the 𝐤𝐿 brigades. So again, they have not defeated the 𝐤𝐿 brigades, despite reporting on the resistance report for 100+ shows, talking about how they have not defeated them. They admit, of course, that they have not defeated the 𝐤𝐿 brigades, and they must do that in this new operation. They will take operational control over territory. Again, we've been hearing about operational control over territory since November 2023. They've had operational control over the Jabalia refugee camp 4 separate times. None of those times did they have operational control, and Beit Hanun is also the same. We saw over the past 3 weeks on the resistance report significant resistance operations in Beit Hanun, an area that was supposedly under Israeli occupation, operational control and occupation. Demilitarizing the territory is a new desire for the Israelis in this one. So this is not just disarming Hamas, is disarming the entire territory. Striking government targets, so civilian targets, which have also, none of this is new. None of these are new. But of course, number 5 is concentrating and then expelling the population, concentrating the population in Rafah and then expelling them. And the number 6 objective is returning the captives. And that's what caught the attention of Israelis, was that the returning of the captives was number 6. And there was an article about how it was number 6. And in that article didn't really talk about mass expulsion or ethnic cleansing or destruction of all of Gaza as a goal of this war. Haaretz wrote a headline that said the hostages could be abandoned and would lead to their starvation within days if Gaza operation is expanded, IDF warns government. So the Israeli military is also warning the government about the starvation levels, that their captives are starving. So according to Army Radio, this is the key point of this operation. The IDF will remain in the areas it takes. The IDF will remain in any area that it has conquered. This is directly from the IDF to Army Radio. And that will be handled according to the Rafah model, meaning the destruction of all structures in the area, and the IDF remaining there without allowing the population to return. So the Rafah model has been the destruction of all civilian buildings in Rafah. And you can see that on this map. If we go to map number 2, we can focus in on, we can see Rafah is a total no-go zone. Israel has been cutting the Moreg corridor between the two. And the Rafah operations just began this week. They were destroying buildings on the southern edge along the Philadelphia corridor, which you can see there. The Philadelphia corridor is along the Egypt border. That's the Rafah crossing, the international crossing that has been closed for a year now. And then just below that, that crossing is Kerem Shalom. That's where the main aid crossing from Israel, which has also been shut down for coming up on a year. I guess actually the year was May 7th, so we just passed 1 year of the total closure of Rafah and the closure of the Gaza Strip. So you can see the Morag corridor cutting between Khan Yunis and Rafah, and these operations that began this week, they will be the focus of the show next week. Qassam released a video from just yesterday that didn't make our production deadline. It also didn't make their production deadline because the operation was a week earlier. But judging by the resistance field reports that we've heard from this week, we have 15 qualitative operations in Rafah on the south side of the Morag corridor, and then several more on the northern side in Khan Yunis. Complex ambushes. One ambush that's on video that we will break down in detail next week is called the Operation Gates of Hell. This is a series of resistance operations, but it was a tunnel-borne operation that lured a Yahalom tunnel unit into a building. The tunnel was then detonated on the building, and the rescue forces, the reinforcements, the tanks that come to save the troops that have been hammered by the resistance, they were attacked by multiple Yasin strikes. And just to give you a sense of some of these other operations, multiple thermobaric grenade RPG operations against the troops in a building, an IED minefield that was preset in Khan Yunis, F7 RPG attacks against troop positions in Khan Yunis, 2 tanks and a D9 hit by Yasin strikes in Khan Yunis, IEDs and booby traps versus 6 troops in Rafah, a second home booby trapped in Rafah, and then the Gates of Hell ambushes is a series of operations that we're going to see. And the second Gates of Hell operation was multiple Shuad and guerrilla action devices against a convoy of a Yahalom unit that's trying to use emulsia to blow up the tunnels. So I believe we will be seeing video of those operations, and we will dig into those deeply next week. But again, the Rafah Brigade we were told by the IDF that the Rafah Brigade was defeated 10 months ago in the summer of 2024. When the new chief of staff went to Rafah a few weeks ago, he said that the goal of the mission of the IDF is to defeat the Rafah Brigade. So these plans, it's difficult to tell what's psychological warfare and what's real and what's different from before. But this, the expulsion of the population is definitely the high point of the criminal list of objectives for this war. So that is in the south. We're going to focus on the resistance operations today in the north. So we take a look at the next map, same map, OCHA map zoomed in. And again, you can see the purple is the buffer zones, the orange is the no-go zones. And I've been reporting for the last 3 weeks on operations that are in the upper right corner in Beit Hanun. The Beit Hanun battalion said this week that the buffer zones, we have shown that the buffer zones will be a target for our mujahideen. Tell your forces, they said, the occupation army soldiers will feel the resistance fighters will come at them from in front of them, from behind them, from underground, and there is no security in your so-called buffer zones, the resistance said. And again, so it will continue to fight in territorial brigades, and when the Israeli military extends from the buffer zone into those areas, they immediately find the resistance. So if we look at number 4, this was a pretty significant unexploded ordnance operation carried out by 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜. You see a fighter here, apparently a wounded fighter, wiring up the main line, which he's going to set in a unexploded 2,000-pound U.S. built Israeli dropped Mark 84 bomb, which we have seen throughout the war. You can see the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜 decal there on the front, and on the back you can see a linear shape charge that is being used to ignite, because the fuse, these dud bombs, the bombs that don't go off because the fuse breaks off or the fuse fails, and all of the destructive capability, as we can see by what we're seeing on the screen here, remains in the unexploded bomb and can be reused. And that is the case that we're looking here on the screen, a massive explosion that looks like what happens when the 2,000-pound bombs are dropped on Palestinian civilians. Maybe we could loop that one more time tomorrow and get a sense of it while I tell you this article in Haaretz that came out this week. The Israeli Air Force is aware of at least 3,000 unexploded bombs in Gaza after tens of thousands of airstrikes. That number is something around 70,000 airstrikes. They don't put that in the article. They say tens of thousands. The IDF ran low on reliable fuses and turned to outdated ones, some decades old. Tens of tons of explosives are lying in Gaza waiting for Hamas, one officer said. According to internal military figures, the Israeli Air Force is aware of at least 3,000 such duds. I think the number is far higher than that, based on the number of airstrikes and the dud rate. Back to Haaretz, they say the reason for the surge in unexploded munitions, according to defense sources, lies in supply issues. The massive number of airstrikes depleted Israel's stockpiles of reliable bomb fuses and trigger components. In response, the military used outdated fuses that have a dud rate that go from 2% in normal times, which is where they're getting those numbers of 3,000, to jump as high as 20%. So if you take 70,000 airstrikes, you're getting a dud rate far over 3,000. And using the bombs to rewire and explode the bomb itself is only one way that these are reused. I've told you many times over the course of this war that the principal thing that the resistance does is they harvest the TNT, the tritonol that's inside inside the bomb, which is about 50% of its weight, overall 2,000-pound weight. About half of it is explosive material that could be harvested and then redistributed and made into all of the famous 𝐓𝐡𝐞 weapons that we've been watching on this program for coming up on 2 years now. If we look at the next slide, you can see that this is a theme that has been carried out in number 5. The theme that's been carried out is that the spring growth, the spring concealment that has led to these operations, which we saw in Beit Hanun, the fighters using the spring concealment to hide beside the highway that the Israelis were using to strike their convoy after they came out from a tunnel. Then the Israelis got upset, and I reported that last week, and they started burning the fields so that you couldn't see, so that the thicket would burn, and that didn't work. It just showed that the thicket turned and the thistle just turned darker. So these are operations that are guerrilla operations that are using the spring growth in Gaza to carry out operations that couldn't have been carried out in the middle of winter. So this is Gaza's natural environment fighting back and giving the guerrillas something to use as concealment, which is something to note. We'll look at the next slide here. You can see the way that the Mark 84 bomb, you can see that, first of all, the size of it with the soldier in the upper right corner. We can see that because we see the soldiers, the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 soldiers standing beside them. But if you look at the bomb at the top, the two main things that are off it are the nose fuse and the tail fuse, and the tail attachment breaks off. And then the metal piecing that you see around the bomb, that's the JDAM kit. So when you hear people talking about JDAMs being dropped, that all they're talking about is the guidance system. The bomb inside the JDAM guidance system is the same standard 2,000-pound bomb that goes back to the days after World War II. And you can see in the bottom left of this a graph about how devastating these explosions are based on a soccer field. We know it based on Nora's news reports at the top of the show. This is how civilians are being killed because they have a massive blast radius. But you can see the weight, 907 kilograms of the 2,000-pound bomb, 429 of those kilograms, almost exactly half, are explosive material. And so what we saw that resistance fighter do was take a linear shape charge and place it in the tail fuse. And all that does is relight the tail fuse and detonate that bomb. So we've shown you a bunch of times these bombs be used. Of course, they were used spectacularly in Beit Hanun before the ceasefire, when they separated a tank turret, threw it dozens of meters and flipped the tank over. These are devastating weapons when they're used in their entirety, but they can also be harvested and used one by one. And if we look at the next slide, you'll see the impact of using that weapon. It's massive explosions. That is from 𝐓𝐡𝐞 operation in Tufa, that's east of Gaza City. And you can see again in these footage, and you can see it in the next one, number 8, that these operations are still in the buffer zone. You can see the fighters operating in the buffer zone. This is 𝐓𝐡𝐞 wiring another IED here in the buffer zone in Tufa, east of Gaza City. So they're not even in the built-up areas. They're still being hit. And in the south, in Rafah, where they're moving into built-up areas, they're being hit at 10 times the rate that we're seeing of the buffer zone operations. This is a U.S. Caterpillar D9 armored bulldozer that's about to get blasted. And you can clearly see it is inoperable after being hit by that IED. They show it back twice to us so that we could see it from the two angles. And after this one, I have a still image of the disabled D9 Caterpillar bulldozer that is on the boycott, divestment, and sanctions list, of course, built in Peoria, Illinois. There you can see the destroyed D9. So that is the resistance report from Gaza for this week, for day 580. I'm going to turn now to Yemen and reset us here. So you're watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada. I'm Jon Elmer. This is the resistance report for day 580. This is the second segment of this report. The first segment is Gaza. We are going to turn now to Yemen. There's some big news in Yemen this week, a number of stories. We can start with the satellite map. This is from the International Space Station, showing the Red Sea. The Red Sea at the bottom of the map, you can see that choke point is the Bab el-Mandeb. The Red Sea runs across from the center of your screen to the upper left, where you can see it go into the Gulf of Eilat, which goes into the port that has been all but bankrupted more than a year ago by the Ansar Allah Yemeni Armed Forces blockade. To the left, at the top, is the Suez Canal, and the American aircraft carrier strike group has been in the north of that Red Sea. Well, on day 52 of the United States war on Yemen, that began with that has carried out more than U.S. has carried out more than 1,000 airstrikes since March 15th, when the operation began, under a presidential order announced on Tuesday during a press availability in the Oval Office. The Pentagon was told by the president to stand down on the war in Yemen, Operation Rough Rider. This ceasefire is a bilateral ceasefire between only the Yemeni armed forces and the United States, and it only impacts the shooting at each other directly. This is the United States suing for peace through Oman, who are negotiating on the Iran deal with the U.S. The Yemenis are not involved in those discussions, and so there's no case that the Yemenis brought this to the Omanis. This is a United States call for a separate ceasefire, and Trump said, "We will stop the bombing of the Houthis effective immediately." And it is worth noting that, as I've been saying week after week covering this, the Yemenis are not targeting ships in the Red Sea. They have not been. In large measure, they're not, because global shipping has long ago responded to the closure of the Red Sea and have rerouted down around Africa, and the shipping industry, with their insurance rates, made it so that it was prohibitive for ships to get involved in that. And they don't just flip overnight. When there's a ceasefire, they don't say, okay, all our ships are going to now change directions, because they have the entire architecture and infrastructure for shipping to now go around Africa. So they're not going to respond to that, which is why we didn't see Yemenis targeting ships in the Red Sea. The foreign minister of Oman released this statement saying, following recent discussions and contact conducted by the Sultanate of Oman and the United States with relevant authorities in Sana'a and the Republic of Yemen with the aim of de-escalation, efforts have resulted in a ceasefire agreement between the two sides, not Israel. Israel is not involved in this statement. Israel this is like I said, a separate bilateral peace. In the future, neither side will target the other, including American vessels in the Red Sea and the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. So direct ceasefire between the two sides. Ansar Allah spokesman Mohammed Abdul Salam said that Yemen's operations supporting Gaza will not stop. We did not submit any requests to the Americans. Rather, we received requests and messages through our brothers in Oman over the past weeks. The Americans have cornered themselves by supporting the Israeli enemy, and we have responded to them. Our position on the Palestinian cause and support for Gaza will not change. Our principled understanding with the Americans has no relation to our stance at all supporting Gaza. And so just to say that the USS Harry Truman and the USS Vinson, which are both, the USS Vinson is down in the Arabian Sea, and the Truman is up north in the Red Sea. The Truman alone was the subject of 40 separate operations in the 52 days, using 200 anti-ship ballistic missiles, anti-ship cruise missiles, and drones. So the aircraft carriers are under fire virtually every single day, 40 operations in 52 days. And the United States had 2 carrier strike groups, half of their B-2 bomber fleet, an entire air wing in Jordan, and they have lost 22 MQ-9 Reaper drones since October 7th, 26 Reaper drones since 2017. So it was a costly war for the Americans. Abdel Malik al-Houthi spoke today, just a few minutes ago, and a couple of things that he said. He said, this week, the Americans carried out aggressive operations against our country with nearly 200 raids and naval bombardments. Most of the American aggressive operations were against our country targeted civilian objectives. The U.S. and Navy bombardment of our country since March 15th amounted to 1,712 raids, air raids, and naval bombardments. The escalation of the American aggression did not affect our military capabilities, did not stop our operations, and did not affect the popular will of our people every week. Our people, despite the American escalation, took to the streets in massive, million-strong demonstrations in hundreds of squares, and demonstrations unparalleled anywhere in the world that took place across Yemen. In the face of this failure, the Americans reached the option of stopping this support, according to what the Americans announced and informed our brothers in the Sultanate of Oman. So pretty clear there. Statements by both sides, and Trump was very clear in the White House that they were standing down. So let's take a look at the next map, because this is only one part, of course, the American War. We have covered the American War every week on the show. But the Israeli war is a separate war that the Americans were participating in and now apparently are no longer. So we will see how that goes, and we will cover it in the weeks ahead. But as you can see on this map, and particularly if we go to the next map with the missile range, I've shown you guys this map before, but you can see Tel Aviv and North Palestine are also within missile range, and these are Yemeni operations just in 1 week. This 1 week, the week where they're under attack by the Americans, 200 plus American air raids. During that time, the Yemeni armed forces carried out 2 drones versus Ramat David Air Base in the north, 1 drone versus a military position in Tel Aviv, anti-ship ballistic missiles and drones versus the USS Harry Truman, a ballistic missile versus Ben Gurion Airport, one drone versus Ashkelon, which is Tel Nof Air Base, one Palestine 2 missile versus Tel Aviv, another Palestine 2 missile versus Ramat David Air Base in the north, that's in Haifa, another Palestine 2 ballistic missile at Ramat David Air Base in Haifa, which brings the total to 30 ballistic missiles fired at Israel since March 18th. And the three main bases they're targeting are the Tel Nof Air Base, the Ramat David Air Base, and the Nevatim Air Base. And at the end of this week, just yesterday, they fired 3 Palestine 2 ballistic missiles, again, twice at Ramat David and once at Nevatim. So those operations carried on consistently post ceasefire agreement with the United States. We have incoming here the missile strike on the Ben Gurion Airport. So just as a heads up to our listeners, you're going to hear sirens and then the strike of the believed to be Palestine 2 ballistic missile that hit Tel Aviv. If we go to number 22 now. So that's a near miss. Was within 300 meters, few hundred meters of the main terminal. It bypassed 4 layers of Israeli air defense. Multiple THAAD missiles were launched in order to intercept it. A THAAD battery, those came from the United States and were placed in Israel for this purpose. Those are $2 billion batteries that fire $12 million interceptors. The Arrow 3 also missed with multiple shots, and it fires a $4 million interceptor. So, tens of millions of dollars of failed interceptions. On this video here, this is CCTV footage of the attack. And the second one here, I have slowed it down so you can see in slow motion just how close we're talking about. That's the air traffic control tower right beside it there. And you can see the explosion. Maybe we can loop that around again tomorrow. You can see the explosion hitting very close. The Yemeni armed forces said about this attack, in support of the oppressed Palestinian people and their fighters, and in rejection of the crime of genocide being carried out by the Zionist enemy against our brothers in the Gaza Strip, the missile force of the Yemeni armed forces carried out a military operation targeting Ben Gurion Airport in the occupied Jaffa area, using a hypersonic ballistic missile, which successfully hit its target by the grace of God. Accordingly, the Yemeni armed forces renew their warning to all international airlines to halt flights to Ben Gurion Airport, as it is no longer safe for air navigation. And that was the case. Also that day, they fired multiple drones that day as well. They also said Yemen and its people, its leadership, and its army continue to stand firm and steadfast in the face of American aggression, never abandoning its religious, moral, and humanitarian duty towards the oppressed Palestinian people, regardless of the consequences, until the aggression on Gaza ceases and the siege is lifted. So very clear that nothing related to the Americans has anything to do with what is happening in the Israeli-Yemeni battle. Israel's response, we can look at the next slide. You can see the crater that was created in this near miss strike. That's an Israeli security force guy climbing out of the 25-meter deep crater. Abu Obaida, spokesperson for the Qassam Brigades, released a statement saying, "Glory to Yemen, Palestine's equal, as it continues to defy the most brutal forces of oppression and refuses to submit or be defeated despite the aggression it is subjected to. It escalates its attacks on the heart of the deformed Zionist entity, surpassing the most advanced systems, air defense systems in the world, and accurately hitting its targets. May God guide your aim, bless your struggle, and accept your sacrifices. You are from us, and we are from you," said Abu Obaida. The Israelis responded as they do by destroying the Sana'a airport, which was immediately begun to be rebuilt within minutes of the Israeli strike. The Israelis also struck 4 power plants and a concrete factory, civilian targets as ever. The next slide is also from the Palestinian resistance. This is the Abu Ali Mustafa Brigade's poster that they published that says, "Long live the Yemeni hands, always pressing on the trigger. Long live the great Yemen." And earlier, the PFLP released a statement that said, "The darkness of the Arab night has been dispelled. Salute to Yemen, its people, and its resistance." The Abu Ali Mustafa Brigade's spokesperson Abu Jamal said, "Today, Yemen sends a message of iron and fire to the Zionist entity in support and backing of our steadfast Palestinian people and their resistance as part of the response to the crimes of the occupation against our people. The Yemeni strike proves the failure of the occupation's security systems and those of its regional affiliates, and writes a page of honor for Yemen in the annals of history amid Arab and international official cowardice regarding our people." So strong statements from the PFLP. And also just to note, a parting shot for the USS Harry Truman, which was scheduled to return home this week. So without a statement from Trump calling for a ceasefire, we were going to see the USS Harry Truman limp home back to America out of the Red Sea, which was going to be taken as a significant victory by the Yemenis. So it looks like the Americans stepped in at that moment and not allowing that to happen. They lost a second FA-18 Super Hornet fighter jet off the deck of the USS Harry Truman. This is now the third FA-18 $70 million fighter jet that they lost. I reported last week on the one that fell into the Red Sea and is now still sitting at the bottom of the Red Sea because of an evasive action that the USS Harry Truman aircraft carrier had to take because of a barrage of Yemeni anti-ship cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and drones. Also, the third jet that was lost during a concentrated attack by the Yemeni armed forces at the end of last year. And the USS Gettysburg, its escort cruiser, shot down its own plane, confusing it for an incoming missile. So significant losses define the end of this battle between the Americans and the Yemenis, and it's very difficult from an objective perspective to say anything other than this is a victory for Yemen, that the Americans have backed out of this battle and left Israel alone to fight that battle. Israel's response to the attack on Ben Gurion was on their own, and Netanyahu kind of sadly said that they will continue to fight all alone against Yemen. So that is the resistance report for day 580.
Thank you so much, Jon. So much has happened just in a short 7 days. Let's go right from your analysis of what was happening in Yemen and the Yemeni armed forces' continued attacks on Israeli military sites to the political analysis of how both Israel and the Trump administration tried to spin the situation with the ceasefire between Yemen and the U.S. as some sort of capitulation to the U.S.'s demands. Can we take a look at that, Ali? I know you have some points on that.
Yeah, thanks, Nora, and thanks, Jon. Jon covered that all really well. And I want to actually, let's start with this video of Donald Trump talking about the deal with Ansarullah, the Houthis, or Houthis as he calls them, because I think it's actually quite interesting what he says.
Yeah.
Very good outcome with the Houthis, and we honor their word. I mean, they made a commitment, and we dealt with other countries that were close to them and their surrogates, and we honor all of their words. We'll see what happens, but I think, I believe that hopefully that's over with, and they'll leave the ships alone. Just leave those ships alone. But so we do. We take their word for it. It was, we hit them very hard. They had a great capacity to withstand punishment. They took tremendous punishment. And, you could say there's a lot of bravery there. It was amazing what they took. But we honor their commitment and their word. They gave us their word that they wouldn't be shooting ships anymore, and we honor that.
Well, so nothing about Israel, obviously. And he says, yeah, they were pretty brave. They took a lot of punishment, as in airstrikes and destruction from the U.S. But
yeah, well, high praise from Donald Trump for Ansarullah, but also an admission that basically, that they could withstand it, and he's sort of putting a positive spin on the briefings that he almost certainly got, saying, Mr. President, what we're doing isn't really making a difference. Either we have to, carry out a full-scale invasion of Yemen or back off. And looks like he said, all right, let's back off. And I just want to point to, John covered this quite comprehensively. It's clear that the official statement from Oman doesn't say anything about Israel. This was a bilateral agreement to that the U.S. will stop bombing and Yemen will stop attacking American ships, which it was never really attacking in the first place,
right,
and had never said it would attack until the U.S. started bombing Yemen, and then it was only a measure of retaliation. I don't think, other than the U.S. warships, as part of the military engagement. So it was never Yemen's agenda to attack American ships. That only came in response to U.S. attacks on Yemen. So that's the first thing to say. But the thing that's really interesting is that all of this was done without consultation to Israel. So if we jump, Tamara, to the Wall Street Journal headline that we have here, which is Trump declares truce with Houthis, but Israel still at risk. And there's a couple of interesting things here. Let's go to that first screenshot from the article, Tamara. Trump's announcement came as a surprise to Israel, and Israeli officials said Israel is concerned about the development. And then they also say in the Wall Street Journal, remember the Wall Street Journal is quite right-wing and often reflects not always, but very often reflects administration thinking. And they say the intensifying conflict risked complicating Trump's nascent nuclear negotiations with Iran. So what does that tell you? Trump wants the negotiations with Iran to succeed because the alternative, and he's talked himself into this, is war, a war which the U.S. would not do well in, because if they cannot defeat the Houthis, if they cannot defeat Ansarullah, they cannot defeat Iran. I think that's clear and doesn't need a whole lot of elaboration. And they also say the lengthening U.S. bombing campaign also raised the possibility that the White House would become ensnared in an open-ended forever war in a distant part of the globe as Trump prepared for a major trip this month to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. And so what does that recall? That recalls the statements from J.D. Vance, the vice president, in that famous leaked Signal chat from a few weeks ago, where he was saying, this war isn't for the U.S., it's for Europe. Of course, we know it's for Israel, but not even J.D. Vance was willing to admit that in what they thought was a private Signal chat. And then let's jump to that second Wall Street Journal screenshot where they have a bunch of pro-Israel pundits speaking. But the one that I really want to focus on is the one at the bottom, Jonathan Conricus, who is British, settler in Israel. I believe he's British, Asa, right? And I see John nodding, and who was a senior spokesperson for the Israeli military during this genocide. We remember him going and showing what purportedly were a few rusty weapons found in a hospital, probably belonging to the security team, and other stunts like that. But he says there appears to be a U.S. deal with the Houthis that doesn't cover Houthi aggression toward Israel. Jonathan Conricus, a retired Israeli lieutenant colonel who served as an Israeli military spokesperson, wrote in a social media post, as long as they attack Israel at the behest of Iran, the region won't be at peace. So Israelis feel thrown under the bus. And this is reflected in the Israeli media. We'll just look at this very quickly. An article from Chaim Levinson in Haaretz headlined, "Sidelined in Iran talks and Houthi deal. Israel needs a breakthrough on Gaza to win a Trump visit." And then Chaim Levinson says, Prime Minister Netanyahu got another surprise on Tuesday from the Temple of America First. And that was, of course, the agreement between the US and Ansarullah. And the article goes into, and it says, Jerusalem was greatly taken by surprise by the announcement that the US would cease the strikes without including Israel in the deal, especially when it is paying a heavy economic price for the cancellation of flights to its only international airport. And similar from Amos Harel, again, these are all analysts who are sort of very close to the military intelligence establishment, reflecting, Israel's deep state, you could say. The headline from Amos Harel, Netanyahu can handle Trump's about-face on Yemen. A sellout on Iran will be much harder. So by sellout, they mean a deal. Like if there's a US-Iran deal reached, then that really puts Israel in the corner. And Harel says, this is the second time in a month that Trump has presented Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu with unwelcome news on short notice. Of course, the previous occasion in April was when Netanyahu learned in front of the TV cameras in real time about the US and Iran in direct negotiations over a nuclear deal.
Minor point, a viewer points out that Jonathan Conricus is Swedish. I didn't know this.
Oh, okay.
But I just looked it up and he is.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. I mistakenly thought he was British, as so many of these people are.
Well, he really did find out in real time because it was one of these Trump Oval Office rambling press conferences with Mark Carney, the Prime Minister of Canada, and he just threw it out there, and you could see the people scrambling, and then right away in Israel, people were responding. Netanyahu's responding they had no idea that this was coming at all, and it's happening live, and it's being articulated what's happening. It didn't even send a text message. Just send Bibi a text and just say we're out. And so because they weren't able to come up with statements for that whole first 6 or 8 hours, the Israeli statements were confused. They weren't ready to be making them. And it was just very clear right from the start that there was nothing. This had nothing to do with Israel.
Yeah. I mean, what does that say? What is the significance of that? The U.S., not consulting Israel in the Yemen ceasefire. What does that signify, if anything?
Well, this is the same thing with the Iran negotiations, which is that the U.S. is pursuing what it views as its own interests, and it doesn't care whether that serves Israel's agenda or not. Right. And we're seeing more and more that the U.S. views its interests as being at odds with those of Israel. If we think way back towards before his inauguration, when Trump tweeted or posted on his Truth Social website that video of Columbia professor Jeffrey Sachs attacking Netanyahu and calling him an SOB for dragging America into wars. First they dragged us into Iraq, now they want to drag us into a war with Iran. And we're seeing that play out now, where Israel's strategy or priority has been to drag the US into a war against Iran, because as much as Israel threatens to attack Iran, hold me back or I'm going to do it, Israel cannot. It's very clear now that Israel by itself could not carry out a strategic attack against Iran. They could barely carry out a symbolic attack following Iran's retaliation in October, they could not carry out any type of attack. I mean, Yemen is presumably a much softer target than Iran, and Israel cannot carry out more than symbolic attacks. They can burn some food warehouses and fuel storage tankers at Hodeidah port, or they can destroy civilian airliners at Sana'a airport, which is what they did, typical Israeli-style terrorism. But they cannot carry out strategic attacks on Yemen that will stop Yemeni missiles from hitting Ben Gurion airport. So if they can't do that in Yemen, they can't do that. They definitely can't reach Iran's missile cities deep underground, let alone destroy them or put them out of action. And what's true for Israel with respect to Iran is also true for the United States, because weeks of unprecedented heavy bombing, you heard Trump admit it, Yemen withstood it. So what could the United States do to Iran? Yes, they can kill. Yes, they can destroy, but they cannot change the strategic equation militarily. And therefore, the United States is forced to go into negotiations with Iran and may well come to a deal. And if they really want a deal, it's going to have to be a deal that looks a lot like the one that Barack Obama signed in 2015 and Trump tore up in 2018 or 2019 or whenever that was. But we'll see, because this administration is erratic. There are still very fanatically neoconservative pro-Israel elements high up in this administration who have an Israel first agenda, not an America first agenda, but an Israel first and only agenda. And they will be doing their best to derail the negotiations with Iran, and they'll be doing their best to derail any other initiatives that are not the ones Benjamin Netanyahu wants. It's far from clear how this will end, but it's clear right now that it's not heading in a straight line in the direction that Netanyahu wants.
Well, thanks for that. And obviously something that we'll keep watching. Things are moving so fast. Let's talk a little bit about ceasefire possibilities. Reuters reported yesterday that Trump said that there would be more information in the next day, meaning any time now, on a potential new proposal for a hostage release deal and ceasefire in Gaza. He said, quote, "A lot of talk going on about Gaza right now. You'll be knowing probably in the next 24 hours." What do we know? What is, again, erratic is a good word.
Yeah, well, that was yesterday, so presumably we should be finding out any minute now. Maybe someone can refresh the news and see if I missed something, since I can't look at it right now. But the point is that in that Reuters story, it goes on to say, on Wednesday, an official close to the mediation efforts said there was no new proposal. There are intensified efforts by the mediators and contacts have never stopped, but there isn't a concrete proposal yet, the official said. Hamas still insists on its full package ceasefire deal in return for an end to the war, while Israel doesn't want to end the war. So what could Trump be referring to? And there are some other interesting developments here, and I just want to look at them for a few minutes. There was a story in Axios, and again, this is from Barak Ravid, the Israeli journalist, who's really a mouthpiece for a lot of official US and Israeli sources. And this story was from May 2nd, and it's framed as a scoop. US and Israel near agreement on aid delivery to Gaza, as if the US and Israel are the ones who are at odds. But what he reveals here is that the US and Israel have come up with a plan for a new mechanism, because remember, Trump had said a week or two ago, you got to be good to Gaza. Those people are suffering. There's a very big need for food and medicine, and we're taking care of it. And nobody knew what Trump meant then. But according to this Axios report, they're coming up with a mechanism that will, quote, deliver aid to people who need it in line with our principles. We support the flow of humanitarian aid with safeguards to ensure assistance is not diverted, looted, or misused. And that this mechanism will involve, according to Israeli officials, Israeli officials say the new mechanism of delivering aid will weaken Hamas because it will deny it the revenue and decrease the population's dependence on the group. So what would this mechanism look like? And so there was a report that appeared in the Swiss newspaper Le Temps just yesterday, and it talks about this. We can just show that, but then if you go to the next link, Tamara, this is a translation of that French language report from May 7th that was published in Le Temps. This is just a translation of it. And it talks about the setting up of this mysterious Gaza Humanitarian Foundation that has been registered in Switzerland. And it says Israel plans to take full control of humanitarian aid entering Gaza. The blueprint includes biometric screening, U.S. mercenaries, and an obscure organization recently set up in Geneva. And then, Tamara, we can show the registration documents for this foundation. This is the official Swiss registration documents for it. And
it's called like the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation.
It was officially registered in Switzerland on the 12th of February. And according to the reporting in Le Temps, this Swiss newspaper, the principals, the founding board members are pretty unknown. I mean, one of them is apparently, or they're lawyers. They don't have any background in humanitarian aid. It's not really clear who they're tied to. But one name stood out here, and we can see that on the registration document, Loic Samuel Marcel Henderson. Who is that? Well, if you Google his name, you get to Bloomberg.com, which tells you that he is the general counsel, that means the head lawyer, for a company called Protection Strategies Incorporated. And Tamara, if we go to the Protection Strategies Incorporated website, the description there is Protection Strategies Incorporated, PSI, is a service-disabled, veteran-owned small business that engages industry-recognized professionals worldwide to provide comprehensive security solutions and personnel security expertise to the U.S. government. Can anyone translate that into plain English in one word?
Mercenaries.
Mercenaries, yeah. This is a U.S. mercenary firm run by former U.S. military and almost certainly employing them. And this is one of the founding board, or the chief lawyer of this U.S. mercenary company is one of the founding officers of this so-called Gaza Humanitarian organization. And so word is getting out about this, but I searched, I don't see anyone who had previously made this connection to Protection Strategies Incorporated, to this particular mercenary firm. If that's out there, I haven't seen it. So this may be something that's just coming to light. But Nora, you pointed out to me earlier that top humanitarian officials, including in the UN, have already warned against this type of this type of scheme by Israel and the US to seize control of aid distribution and weaponize and politicize it.
Yeah, I mean, it's and not just, a bunch of different UN aid agencies have come out, in opposition to it, full-throated opposition, but also Palestinian government in Gaza has come out against it, saying that this is we've seen these tricks before. We're not going to allow a U.S.-Israeli mercenary corporation that has no ties to actual humanitarian aid distribution infrastructure to be the distributors of the aid that is not theirs to administer. So there's that, and so yeah, we'll see. This is one more step of the U.S. and Israel trying to undermine the work of agencies like UNRWA, the UN Agency for Palestine Refugees, as well as the WHO. For all the faults of all of these agencies, these are the ones that have done it for decades. And this reminds me, just a few days ago, there was an operation in Gaza where Israeli drones were attacking Palestinian police who were trying to wrestle away looted aid and from people, the armed gangs in Gaza, who are most likely definitely backed by Israel and the U.S. to try and sow chaos, to try and stop the distribution of aid in a legitimate manner. And then Israel turns around and says that Hamas are the ones that are looting. It's complete backwards reality. Anyway, that's
and just to close this out, this isn't the first time, obviously, that the U.S. and Israel have schemed to try to subvert and take over aid distribution. Everyone remembers Joe Biden's pier that floated away into the sea. Everyone remembers how the Biden administration attempted to use World Central Kitchen as a front for taking over aid distribution and trying to undermine the situation in Gaza. And all of those schemes failed. And this one will too, because they don't have the boots on the ground to make it happen. And
well, this is where it ties into this new Israeli operation, because the goal is to get the aid distribution in Rafah through these private companies built into this operation.
And to use it to use it to say to people in Gaza, if you want to eat, you have to go to Rafah.
Exactly.
Right.
Because that's the only place the food is going to be. Right. So it's turning how diabolical to call this the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation and use aid as a weapon for ethnic cleansing. It's just diabolical. Anyway, we'll be following it, but I just wanted to shed light on some of those details that are emerging.
That's good. Thank you. Finally, the Syria-Israel indirect talks.
Just very quickly, because we're coming up. I just wanted to point out some developments here. That yesterday, Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, aka Ahmed al-Shara, the so-called president of Syria, don't remember anyone electing him. We were told that the previous government was overthrown for not being democratic. Mm-hmm. No talk of elections now, but he was welcomed in Paris by Emmanuel Macron, the president there at the Élysée Palace. I just thought it was very ironic that that al-Jolani, who was previously a senior aide to the leader of ISIS, was received in Paris 10 years after the horrific Bataclan attack and the Nice attacks, which were attributed to ISIS. Seems to be water under the bridge as far as the French are concerned. Whether ISIS was really behind those attacks, who knows now? ISIS seems to be very close to Western governments, as seen here by this handshake. And what Jolani confirmed during his press conference with Macron is what had been reported a little bit earlier in the day, that that Syria or his purported government of Syria are in indirect talks with Israel, and it was reported separately that those are being mediated by the United Arab Emirates, which of course is a very close ally of Israel. So all of this is very predictable, that none of what many people hoped would come to pass in Syria has come to pass. No sanctions have been lifted. No reconstruction is happening. No investment is coming in. And that's because the US will not lift any sanctions on Syria, if it ever does, until Syria is turned into a Syrian version of the Palestinian Authority, simply an entity with no real sovereignty, whose government is allowed to exist only as long as it protects and serves Israel. So we will likely see Jolani and others continuing to grovel and pander to Israel in the hope of stabilizing their rule. And the result will likely be, my prediction is, the more they give, the more will be demanded of them. That's the pattern.
Yep.
That's quite a good analogy that you've made with the Palestinian Authority and Syria, Ali. So something I hadn't thought of before, but it's quite apt because what we've seen since the former Al Qaeda affiliate took over Syria is really a kind of dismantling of any Syrian state in a lot of ways. Certainly of the Syrian military and of Syrian defenses and so forth, and of the taking over of more and more Syrian land, the occupation of more Syrian land by Israel. So their authority is increasingly lessened. The Palestinian Authority has always been a bit of a misnomer because it has very little authority, and it's not really Palestinian in the sense that it doesn't serve actual Palestinian aspirations and interests.
Yeah. Well, talk a little bit about who this. We showed a screen grab of the article that Omar Karmi wrote. No, that you did. That you wrote. Meet Israel's Man in Ramallah. Talk about who al-Sheikh is and why it's significant.
Yeah, thanks, Nora. Well, a few weeks ago, the Palestinian Authority announced and appointed a vice president for the first time. This man you can see on the right of the screen here, Hussein al-Sheikh. And he is, the Palestinian Authority really has been a collaborationist authority. It's really Israel's Palestinian Authority is probably the most apt way to describe it, because it has always, since its inception in the early 90s, played a role in enforcing the Israeli occupation and collaborating with Israeli occupation soldiers. Hussein al-Sheikh, so he's been appointed as this new position, vice president, again, like Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, a completely unelected position, and this position has never actually existed before within the Palestinian Authority. It's kind of invented for him. And he's a former colonel in the preventative security, the so-called preventative security, one of the Palestinian Authority's many armed agencies, which is implicated in torture and other human rights abuses. And he's really been appointed at this time and is being lined up as the successor to Mahmoud Abbas, whose term as the so-called president of the Palestinian Authority expired more than 16 years ago, and who has repeatedly cancelled elections, and all the polls show that he would almost certainly lose those elections, so he just simply cancelled them. And in this article, I read a piece in Foreign Policy, the sort of in-house journal of US imperialism in a lot of ways. There's a very long and kind of glowing profile of Hussein al-Sheikh from July 2023 that I go through some analysis of in that. I mean, it's kind of a puff piece, but it has some interesting insights. And the most revealing one is in it quote the journalist, the foreign policy journalist, quote a unnamed former senior intelligence officer, Israeli intelligence officer, who still was at the time of the publication of the article active as a reservist in Israeli intelligence. And the standout quote there is he describes Hussein al-Sheikh as, quote, our man in Ramallah. Ramallah, of course, being the West Bank city, which is kind of the de facto capital of the Palestinian Authority. So it's an interesting article. It was interesting to research. And you mentioned our colleague Omar Karmi, who does a lot of the groundwork on a lot of very good analysis on the Palestinian Authority.
Yeah.
And he's also written a very good piece about recently, and another one actually, I think came out yesterday or today, about how the Palestinian Authority has lost any form of
popular legitimacy.
That it may have ever had.
Yeah.
And you know,
No, go ahead, Ali.
So I just wanted to come back to something Asa said earlier, just to give a bit of historical perspective for this. So, you know, Mahmoud Abbas, of course, is the chief enforcer on behalf of Israel. He and his forces, which are American trained, Western funded, work closely with Israel to try to crush resistance to Israel in the West Bank. But, you know, Abbas is not in good health and he's in advanced age. And so, as Asa said, they're looking for a succession. And it's very reminiscent of how the US sidelined Yasser Arafat in order to install Mahmoud Abbas, because back in, when was it, 2003 or so, when the US was getting fed up, the US and Israel were getting fed up with Arafat, not because Arafat wasn't going along with their plans, but because he wasn't going along with them far enough and fast enough. Yeah. And so they invented the position of prime minister in the Palestinian Authority to install Mahmoud Abbas and basically to compete with Arafat and eventually replace him, which is what happened after Arafat died under very mysterious circumstances, was almost certainly poisoned, as the investigations of Clayton Swisher over many years, I think, established with a great degree of credibility. That's all been memory hold. And then Mahmoud Abbas was put in place. Now they want to sideline and replace Mahmoud Abbas. And so they invented this position of vice president, which has no basis in the Palestinian Basic Law. And even if it did, I mean, you know, they don't even pretend to care about democracy or consulting Palestinians. It's just whoever Israel and the United States install. And that's what we see going on here.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not as if Abbas wasn't serving their interests adequately. You know, the most infamously that he described collaboration or so-called security coordination with the Israelis as sacred, you know, many years ago. And as recently as last year, Benjamin Netanyahu himself said that, quote, we need the Palestinian Authority. We cannot allow it to collapse, and that the Palestinian Authority does our job for us. And really the concerns to replace Mahmoud Abbas is simply that if he sort of stubbornly stayed in place until his likely death, you know, he's 89 years old, said to be in ill health, there's a very high likelihood that the Palestinian Authority would collapse. You know, in one of the articles that Omar wrote, he is talking about how there's rumors of competing forces within Fatah stockpiling weapons around the West Bank. So, you know, we could see this kind of intra-Palestinian Authority fallout after Mahmoud Abbas's death with no clear successor in place. That's what his backers are trying to avoid by installing this man.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for diving into that, Asa. And as you mentioned, our colleague Omar has some recent reports, including right there at the top of the page at electronicintifada.net, an interview, really incredible interview, over an hour with our contributor Abdeljawad Omar at Birzeit University in the occupied West Bank, and they go into the history of PA collaboration with Israel and the U.S., as well as, you know, kind of focusing in on as you mentioned, you know, the legitimacy, what remains of the legitimacy of the PA within Palestinian civil society. So it's a really incredible interview, and I encourage our audience to give that a listen or a watch. And we have so much on the Electronic Intifada right now, all of our features by our writers in Gaza. We have a feature by an activist in the West Bank as well. We have, just extraordinary numbers of, and there's, of course, our senior editor, Maureen Claire Murphy's monthly feature, The Return of Palestinian Pictures. So for the month of April, just really moving photographs and essay. Yeah.
Yeah, extraordinary work by photographers in Gaza and in the West Bank as well, but just extraordinary images that I think are worth looking at and contemplating, because I think we're all overwhelmed by constant video. I'm not denigrating video, it's a very important medium, but I think these images capture reality in a way that really confronts one with the horror of what the world is allowing to do, plus a really thorough, meticulously reported text summarizing what has been happening in Palestine over the last month. So we're very grateful to Maureen for this incredibly valuable feature, and of course to all the photographers in Palestine whose work is featured here.
Yeah, absolutely. So go to electronicintifada.net to read all of our new features and news posts and podcast episodes, et cetera, et cetera. Also to sign up, get our daily email digest right there. If you click on Get Updates at the top left, at the top right, if you have some money that you'd like to donate to keep this platform alive and vibrant, go to the Donate Now link at the top right. And I think that's it. Ali, did you want to say anything about our monthly donors?
Yeah, I wanted to say thank you to a couple of people by name or by first name, but of course, just as I do that, my thing freezes up. But hold on, give me a second, because it's so important to us to say, we can't always say it in person or to every individual, although we try to, how grateful we are to you for all your support that comes in so many different ways, by sharing the work, by posting on social media, the articles, the videos, the live stream, letting people know about what we do, of course, liking and subscribing, your comments under this live stream and under all our videos, which I do go back and read. I don't always read them during the program, but tell us what you think in the comments. We do read them, and it's very valuable to us. And of course, we're very grateful to all the people who support us financially, who can, and I know not everyone who can, which makes it even more important for those who can to do so, because you make all this work available to everyone. So just a few people, representative of the many more who do so: 𝐄𝐥𝐿, Catherine, Martin, David, and Tina. We are very grateful for your support this month and all the time. It's really what keeps us going.
Literally and spiritually. Thank you so much, Ali. And I want to give, of course, a big thanks and shout out to Tamara Nassar, our director and producer. Thank you, Tamara, for everything that you do. Thanks to Ellie Gerzon, social media consultant and producer. Thank you to Michael F. Brown for fact-checking. Maureen Claire Murphy, our senior editor, everyone at the Electronic Intifada, and Pierre Loisel for putting together the news reports that go out to various radio stations every week, as well as the condensed version for radio of this live stream. Thank you, Pierre. And on behalf of myself, Asa, John, Ali, and Tamara, thank you all for watching and listening, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.